Okay, should we get this night rolling? It is 6 o'clock.
Let me start with, and I'll pass it back to you. Can we have confirmation from Ryan Albahari that we are live on channel 8? We are live on channel 8. I'll go ahead and record, and then I'll pass it back to you, Councilmember. All right.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's study session of the Boulder City Council. I'm Councilmember Tara Weiner. Thank you for joining us. So we have on tonight's agenda 2 items. Our first work item will cover wildfire protection and resiliency, and our second item will be an overview of the draft 2022 Boulder Parks and Rec Master Plan. I know that both of these items are of great interest to our community. I'm really looking forward to tonight. But first, we're going to start this evening with a few announcements. We have the slides up. Great. COVID-19 vaccinations. For information and provider locations for free COVID-19 testing, go to www.boco.org/COVID testing. And the address for our Boulder testing site is 2445 Stasio Drive in Boulder. It's open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And for vaccination information and provider locations, go to www.boco.org/COVID vaccine. 2022 boards and recruitments. Annual recruitment has closed out, but we are still recruiting for the following boards due to the low number of applications and in some cases, no applications. So please, community, consider applying to these boards and commissions. We have the Beverage Licensing Authority, the Boulder Junction Access District Parking, try saying that 3 times fast, Boulder Junction Access District Travel Demand Management, Board of Zoning Adjustment, Cannabis Licensing Advisory Board, Design Advisory Board, Downtown Management Commission, Library Commission, University Hill Commercial Area Management Commission. Applications are being accepted until further notice. Find board and commission descriptions and vacancies online at www.bouldercolorado.gov/boards-commissions. If you have any questions or need assistance, please contact the city clerk's office at cityclerksoffice@bouldercolorado.gov. As we get closer to opening up our
It is only regular meetings that we will be inviting and coming back in person. Please look for more information on these changes through our social media platforms and on our website soon. Thanks so much.
I just got a text from a community member that they're trying to get onto channel 8 and they're having trouble. You think that's just him or is it an issue? Is there some way to know?
I have not heard there is an issue, but we will check in the background.
Awesome. So before we go into our work items, I would like to outline how this meeting is going to be conducted. First, we're going to review staff's presentations for each of the work items, and then we're going to have time for questions. So City Council members, please wait for staff to finish their presentation before we ask questions, as we're going to have plenty of time for discussion after each item. And now I'll ask City Manager Nuria Rivera-Vandermeij to introduce our first work item.
Thanks so much. And the increasing impacts of climate change are felt on so many levels, and the acceleration of extreme weather events and the proliferation And the proliferation of increased natural disasters has certainly been felt by so many of us right here in our community over the past several months. With the impact of the Marshall and the NCAR fire still being felt across the city, tonight we're going to be focusing on what the city has been doing in anticipation and in response to wildfire protection and resiliency. It's a deep and engaging conversation. I know one that all of you have been asking to have together, and so excited that we'll be starting and kicking that off today. And one that I want to just say that we probably won't be able to finish tonight. And so we hope that it will be a series of conversations that we will continue to have in the future. And what I hope you'll see as I pass the reins over to our fire chief to kick this off is that the work doesn't just sit with one department, but behind this, there are multiple departments and external partners as well that really come together to address the critical complexity these type of events require for an effective response. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'll ask Chief Calderazzo to get us started. Mike?
Thanks, Nuria. Good evening, Council. For the record, Mike Calderazzo, Fire Chief. Thought I'd echo what Nuria just mentioned about the local disasters we've had, and the fact that if you just look at the names on the list here tonight to help answer questions, I don't think there's a department in the city that isn't called to action when a wildfire disaster doesn't occur in our area. So really, it is an all hands kind of effort. And even though I'm leading the presentation tonight, though you'll hear from a few other speakers as well during the presentation, but it really was and is a true joint effort among city departments. And you'll see that as we talk about the presentation tonight. So if we could queue up the presentation, I don't know if it's up or not. I don't know that I can see it.
Not yet, but it's coming, I'm sure.
All right. And I'll say the purpose of our presentation is do our best to sort of give a broad overview of how wildfire response works today and what prevention and mitigation related efforts have been happening, what's already in process, what's coming, and then ultimately some of the areas we think will need some more teasing out to move forward effectively. So if we could move to that first slide on the NCAR fire itself, that's the next slide. We thought this would highlight, and obviously being the most recent larger fire that we had, I think it helps to illustrate a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. A lot of different agencies coming together, a lot of work that came together to provide a successful outcome this time. I think what I want to stress as we go through this presentation is no matter how much preparation, planning, and hardening we do, that threat of wildfire may overtake us either way. And the key message for all of us is to be prepared. We are a wildfire-prone community, and there are things that all of us can do to keep ourselves as safe as possible. So on the 26th of March, the NCAR fire started, human-caused. A lot of things came together pretty well that day, starting with something that I want to highlight among our own staff. So we have Wildland specialists on the team that share with all of our on-duty resources sort of a situational awareness type message that basically, hey, we got a windy day coming, a red flag day coming. You're going to want to be prepared with the right gear, right equipment, and be able to staff wildland vehicles if necessary and to get out there and hit a fire fast. So there was some situational awareness provided. Fire began very quickly. A lot of things went right into place. Most notably, we had our emergency operations center stood up very, very quickly. We were able to contain this fire to 190 acres. We used, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, resources locally, regionally, and even at the state level. And we were able to have really a successful outcome because there were no injuries to anyone and no structures lost in this blaze, even though there was certainly a threat to the city limits from that. And of course, the weather did cooperate. But let's talk a little bit about some of the things that played a role in the fire. If we go to the next slide, I'll give you an overview here of the different areas of preparation and planning that I hope gives us sort of a level base to talk about. We're going to talk about resources. I'll go into that next. The key part of how we prep for wildfire response, that's the training of our responders. How the city has tried to harden itself in terms of policy, that's through code and ordinance, and some of the plans that play a role in how we respond and prepare for wildfire. So next slide, please. So obviously there's city, county, and state resources that we rely on in the city. Most of you are already fairly familiar with our 7 fire stations plus our 8th wildland cache, which is out at the reservoir. We have on duty at any one time 25 structure firefighters, 6 wildland specialists, and division chief in charge of them as well. In terms of actual response, besides the city trucks, we do have some wildland specific engines, but I think it's important to note that all of our wildland vehicles are what we call cross-staffed. So why that mattered at the NCAR fire is if you know it's coming ahead of time, then you jump rigs and you jump on the right rig. We'll talk a little bit later, I think, about where we are in terms of resources, particularly in South Boulder, but that's how we basically do it in the city. The city's part of, there's also city responders in the open space and mountain parks. So our rangers provide response as well. They came to the table as well on the NCAR fire, helped us evacuate people off the trails, and they were a part of the wildfire response. County resources that are available to us come from basically departments around us. So fire departments around us have wildland responders, as well as the sheriff's office. They have a wildland team as well. And all of those we brought to bear on the fire as well. Finally, there's the state resources that we have available to us. We are part of what they call the Coal Creek region. I won't go into all the details, but some of the assets that we can call fairly quickly, we did on the NCAR fire. We had a couple of air tankers we called in, and they were able to lay lines of slurry on the eastern flank of the fire and help the hand crews down there keep that fire from spreading into the city limits. And obviously the wind helped, but having those air assets available to us from the state was a huge help. The state has a couple of helicopters that could have been called in, and they're actually getting another helicopter, their own, and they bought one, a Firehawk, which is now looking for a home. So they're searching the state where they're going to put that helicopter resource for wildfire fighting. So that's what's generally available to us when a wildfire begins. In terms of structure, our wildland team forms usually the basis of our incident management team. So those 6 responders that I have, they were a key role in the Marshall fire. They immediately went into action on the NCAR fire as well, and they help us get resources ordered fairly quickly. If we can go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about stuff that I think you all see in adjustments to base and may have questions about. But in order to keep the entire team trained up for wildland response, that is every one of our firefighters. Our wildland team is the team that actually delivers the training, not just to them, but countywide. So they're relied on for that. And these are just some statistics about some of the hours that were delivered even during COVID. But more importantly, you see this at least once a year in November as part of an adjustment to base. Why this matters and why we called it out here is that in order to maintain or improve the level of response of responders in the city, we routinely deploy them both regionally and nationally. And by deploying them, it helps us get them the national credentials that allow us as a city to get reimbursed when they deploy on a wildland fire. So if a wildland fire occurs in our city, and it passes that 12-hour mark, and we're looking to get reimbursed for some of the bigger fires, the feds, the state, they reimburse based on those national certifications. So having our firefighters deploy and gain that critical experience is a big part. It's humanitarian first, obviously, we go out and we help, but it's also selfish. So by sending them out, it allows us to improve the level of qualifications that we have in town at any given time. And so it's critical that I be able to not only send folks out, but also keep that highly qualified response force in town. So that's why training is a big part of how we get our folks in a ready way. And that was used on the NCAR fire. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some other things that we've done as a community over the last 30 years. This is probably known to some of you. In 1994, probably a little bit before that actually, it was a big push to remove wooden roofs from the city. Obviously, it goes without saying that shake shingles provide the kind of fire hazard propagation that we're trying to avoid. And so back in the early 90s, the city passed an ordinance that, and I'll explain here in a second why this is really very different from what you usually see. It essentially made the shake shingle requirement a retroactive piece. That is, it didn't just wait to see if there was a renovation or a new build, but everyone in the city needed to, if they were over 50% wood, they needed to change their roof, and they had 20 years to make that happen. So by 2014, all roofs in the city were no longer considered wooden, if you will. And so that was a huge, huge thing, and a huge push to harden our city against the threat of wildfire. Fast forward to 2013, and we adopted the international, I'm sorry for the acronym here, but it's the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. That's what that stands for. And it's part of the family of international codes. So you got the International Building Code that you've approved with amendments. In this case, the Wildland Urban Interface Code hardens, it does something very similar, basically requiring buildings to be protected against the threat of wildfire. The difference here, though, is that this is not a retroactive adoption of the code. This one is about new builds and renovations, and that includes the update that we did in 2018. So this is all about new builds and builds going forward, with the exception, of course, of the shake shingle ordinance. And then you all know, and I get questions about this all the time, and so I did want to explain some of the difference, especially for the viewing public. But within the city limits, there is no open burning allowed, and that is a huge help to avoiding a wildfire from taking hold. Open burning meaning no fires that can produce embers that could spread. That is not the case. So it doesn't matter if it's a red flag day or non-red flag day. It is simply outlawed, period, inside city limits. Same holds true for open space property. It's not allowed. Can't have campfires out there. That's not true for the unincorporated areas of Boulder County. So there is a difference. On a red flag day, the sheriff will declare open burning outlawed, but on normal days, that's not the case. So there is a difference between what we require and what is generally out there in the unincorporated areas. If we could go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the plans that apply to wildfire. So these are the big ones. The emergency operations plan is something that's been around for a really, really long time. And it basically is about all disasters and highlights who is responsible primarily for what types of disaster and what is normally expected to happen. The emergency operations plan itself is actually a small document, and then there's lots of annexes depending on the different types of emergencies. The next thing we have is a community wildfire protection plan. And really the purpose on that is to identify our local hazards and risks from wildfire. And the idea is that's the big plan for hardening our community, what the different things that we can do to improve our approach to wildfire. That one actually probably needs an update. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the structure protection plan actually played a big role in our NCAR response. The structure protection plan actually grids the interface around the city, and we use that to actually dictate how we respond to wildfire in certain areas of the city. So it dictates what crews, what we'll need, where they'll lay lines and so on. And we actually used it on the NCAR fire to great effect. When you could literally watch from the NCAR site, the crews stretching lines a mile, 2 miles into the interface to protect the homes there on the eastern flank of the fire. And that was all part of the plan. And we actually trained to that plan as well. So it played a big role in the NCAR fire and helped us with that. The last plan that's been approved by council and been in place for some time is the Forest Ecosystem Management Plan that Open Space, it's their management tool for their entire suite or area. And we use that plan for all of the risk mitigation that we do in wildfire. So that our team, it works with the open space team to, when you hear about prescribed burns, we're typically following the Forest Ecosystem Management Plan. If we're not talking about ag burns, these kinds of burns, that's what we're following. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that plan played a role in the NCAR fire. In fact, Dan Burke, who's on with us tonight, will go into a little more detail and show you how that played a role in the NCAR fire to our benefit. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll talk about what's actually in the pipeline that council will see later in the year. These two plans, the flood and stormwater master plan and the drought plan, both obviously have an impact on climate and these types of risks to our community. And you'll see those later this year and have an opportunity to talk about these two plans and their impact on wildfire resilience. So with that, what I'll do is I'll hand it over to Dan Burke from Open Space and Mountain Parks to talk specifically about the things that OSMP has done with being the biggest landowner around the city of Boulder, the things they've done and how that played a role as well in the NCAR fire. So Dan, if you're on, I will yield.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, and good evening, Council. Dan Burke, Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to be spending a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, on talking about basically land management actions, land management strategies, on how we manage land in the city and on our open space can actually help positively fire behavior and fire prevention of catastrophic fire. I think it's very helpful to know, especially when you look at the context of our open space system. You can see just from the green shaded areas that surround the city of Boulder that there is this big green belt of open space lands. So how that land is managed obviously has a big part to play in this discussion tonight. Before we talk specifically about land management strategies and fire prevention mitigation strategies, I first thought it would be good to spend 1 minute or so just giving you some high-level context about the open space system, because some of these facts and figures, if you will, do play a role in disaster management in particular. So overall, the city manages about 46,000 acres or protects about 46,000 acres of open space. About 90% of our acreage is actually out in the county and outside of city limits of Boulder. It's fairly small system compared to, let's say, the forest, national forest systems around, or even smaller than Boulder County open space. But yet we see 5.6 million annual visits to our system. So it's a very popular, a very well used system in terms of enjoyment and visitor use. And with that comes the sort of access to our system. We have 155 miles of designated trail. In addition to that, there's about 150 miles of what we call social trails, or trails that have been created by visitors but are not called for in an approved plan per se. So really, you're looking at about 300 miles of a trail network of some sort around our system. And some of that has a role in fire. In fact, some of our trails are purposely maintained and hardened to provide access. So they can provide vehicle access in times of disaster or maintenance access, and they can also provide fire breaks. So I just wanted to mention that aspect about the trail system. We maintain and we recognize about 110 trailheads and formal access points onto our system. Plus, in addition to that 100 or so, we have another 145 informal access points. Again, those are access onto our systems that visitors use that are not sort of called for or recognized and maintained by the department. So yet you're looking at 250 to 300 access points onto our system. So really, I think the takeaway here is that there's a large wildland urban interface to the system that is 100 years old that sort of grew to surround the city of Boulder. A couple of interesting facts. We have about 65% of our system that's in a grassland ecosystem and about a quarter of our systems in a forest ecosystem. And what's interesting and kind of a unique aspect about compared to nationwide open space agencies is about a third of our systems in active agriculture, about 15,000 acres, and over 13,000 of those acres have some sort of grazing, cattle grazing on them. So next slide, please. So I'll go in now a little bit into the management toolkit, if you will, or our fire prevention toolkit. And so these are all sort of touch points and strategies and program areas that all have a role in trying to prevent and mitigate catastrophic or fire events, if you will. And I'll start with what I think is the bread and butter that most people would think of, and that's our fuels and ecosystem management. And when I talk about that area, what I'm referring to, if you open up that toolkit, it's forest thinning. We have a very active forest thinning. I'll talk about that in just a bit. Prescribed grazing. I mentioned grazing before, and we'll talk about it again in a future slide. We have a very aggressive noxious and invasive weed suppression program. And again, noxious and invasive weeds play a role in fine fuels and adding to fire risk. We do prescribed burns, as Mike said, in partnership with fire department. And then there's some actually other tangential program areas that for ecosystem management, maintaining soil health, maintaining habitat and doing habitat restoration projects, all to get our ecosystems more in balance, and a more balanced ecosystem are more resilient and give us a better chance when it comes to natural disasters, if you will. And then I mentioned about the trail system and managing our trails and our roadways and keeping them well maintained, because a lot of them do provide important access for staff and disaster access when needed and called upon, fire breaks, bringing up vehicles, that sort of thing. Next, in regulations, Mike mentioned a few of the code and things that apply to city limits and mentioned open space regulations. No fireworks, no fires on open space, no smoking. So a number of regulations that are designed for visitor safety and natural resource protection aspects. And with regulations comes enforcement. And so we have 25 rangers and we have very active ranger patrols that are in the business of enforcing regulations, but also to educate and inform our visitors. And in that vein of education and inform, when it comes to fire prevention, know before you go, visit open space and be prepared, know where you are in an open space. We have a number of education and outreach staff, a number of volunteers that are at our trailheads, that are out on our system, that are there to help spread the word, if you will, in addition to the signs and the signage that we can do and that sort of thing. And other than staff from an education outreach perspective, we have opportunities through press releases and PSAs and social media and our website presence to help get the word out. And a big focus this year is sort of asking people and our visitors to know before you go, know what our regulations are, know what the conditions are, know where you're on an open space in case there's an emergency or even a lightning storm or a fire event, that you know where you're at and you know how to get off our system. So sort of that visitor awareness is really important. So if we can go to our next slide, because we're gonna dip our toes a little bit deeper into some of that fuel mitigation work. And I'll start off with forest thinning. Mike mentioned the Forest Ecosystem Management Plan, which sort of describes where in our system we feel like thinning operations have the biggest bang for their buck. And over the past 10 years, we've carried out over 2,000 acres of forest thinning projects in our wooded areas, forested areas, as noted in red here. And over about 500 or 600 acres are right in south of NCAR, in that NCAR fire burn vicinity. So a number of acres, and I'll talk to you in just a little bit about how that impacted fire behavior. So next slide, please. In addition to forest thinning, cattle grazing is actually a very important component in terms of fuel mitigation. A lot of people don't think of it in that regards, but this illustrates it very well. We have a fence that runs down the middle of this slide, and the left-hand slide is an ungrazed area, and a lot of that brown tall grass area is the invasive tall oak grass, which is a noxious woody vegetation that overtakes areas if it's not managed, and overtakes native vegetation. And on the right-hand side is a grazing unit that we put in to help suppress tall oak grass. And you can see the visual difference between the presence of that noxious weed, which tends to collect thatch and fine fuels on the left, versus the grazed area on the right. Next slide, please. So let's talk about those two particular strategies in particular and how it related to the NCAR fire. So the NCAR fire burn area, that 200 acres that Mike referred to, is shaded in pink here in the outline of the burn area. And we shaded over that burn area with our fire mitigation strategies. So the brown area is those areas that have been thinned over the past 10 years or so, some of it very recently, some of it a few years ago. And the cross-hatched area is the areas where we have active tall oak grass grazing units installed. And in fact, the cattle are on their way right now this week into these grazing units to help suppress that invasive tall oak grass. And the story here is that these two mitigation strategies definitely impacted in a positive way fire behavior. And so a lot of the fire began to hit these mitigated areas, and it gave our firefighters a much better chance to get a quick containment of the fire. And of course, weather conditions always plays a role, and we ended up having some favorable characteristics on that end too. So next slide, please. So here's a look at the burn area when it hit a previously treated thinned area. And what you're looking at here is, did the fire crown out, if you will? Did it and torch the trees where the trees were sort of passing flames from one tree to another, or did the fire stay low? And in this case, because it's well-spaced ponderosa forest, which you want to see in a ponderosa stand, the fire tended to stay low. It burned with less intensity, and we didn't have very much tree mortality at all because of the fire tended to not get into the crowned areas of this treated area. So it's a success in that regards. Next slide. So when we take a look at the grazing and how the grazing impacted fire behavior, we've installed research plots on our tall oak grass suppression areas in order to help us over time get a sense of, is this grazing effective against mitigating against tall oak grass? And so we have these little circular areas, and there's one right in the middle here, and those poles are holding up a fence in which the cows cannot graze at. And so you tend to get a bunch of higher tall oak grass that have accumulated fine fuels in it. And you can see the difference in the colors. You had a hotter burn and a taller burn in these ungrazed areas compared to the grazed areas out here, which tended to have less burn intensity to them. So ungrazed research plots appear to have burned hotter than our grazed surroundings. And I think I have one more slide for you. So just an overview. So what we have going on in terms of land management is not only ongoing, but increasing mitigation of fuel reduction through grazing, forest thinning, prescribed burns, and invasive weed removal. Ongoing staff training. Mike mentioned staff that are trained for wildland fire deployment. Open space on any given year, we have between 25 and 40 staff that are trained in what we call red carded. And so training is very important. We also do training on how to close the system or close a trail. We just had our new outreach staff and our new volunteers participate in a training on closing a portion of the system when it's needed to be called for. We have increasing staff presence out on the system, focused ranger patrol, and visitor safety education, outreach, and communications has been a big focus of ours over the last few months. And we're also focusing on continuous improvement. So as a department, we're refining our own staff procedures for disaster preparedness and response, and how we could better coordinate and feed into larger response efforts that we're going to talk about and more in just a little bit. And there's also a cross-departmental review that's been happening for the past year that will be wrapping up soon between the fire department and open space staff to identify ways that we can enhance our cross-departmental collaboration and effectiveness in reducing catastrophic wildland fire risk. So we actually called for that, Mike and I and city manager's office called for that review to take place about a year ago. We're wrapping things up, and we're really looking forward to what the staff came up with to help with that effectiveness and collaboration. So I hope that gives you a feel for land management and how management can be an effective tool in impacting fire behavior. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Mike.
Thanks, Dan. And I neglected to mention that this is all part of our approach to the national strategy. It's called the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, which recognizes that there's three main areas of focus that converge to harden communities against the threat of wildfire. That is resilient landscapes, as you saw with open space. That's a big part of what they do. But fire adapted communities and safe and effective wildfire response are the other two areas that we're actively working to improve across the board. And a good example of that is now with Red Flag Days, regionally, even all of the region's responders, we staff up wildland responders on Red Flag Days and high wind days, just in preparation to dump a lot of resources as quickly as we can if there are starts. If we go to the next slide, the big mitigation on open space property into the city limits now. So if we go to the next slide, kind of want to share with everyone in the community some of the things that our wildland team does in addition to assisting open space on their property. Every individual homeowner, they can help as well. We've been working hard on the interface, and you can see this is an example of our guys doing what we call curbside assessment. So they'll drive through an area and they will assess the hardness, if you will, against wildfire of a particular parcel. And we color code that. Now, what you're seeing here in this map is actually 2 years old. We had to kind of put some of these on hold with COVID. But the attempt is to really color code and give homeowners an opportunity to see where they land. Since it's 2 years old, obviously, people could have done some things and we need to go out and reassess. But it's intended also to drive people to some of the other services that our team provides, and that's detailed home assessments. So you can scan that QR code and it'll take you to the map for the city, and you can see those parcels. The detailed home assessment is different. It's much more detailed. The guys go out, they will interface with the homeowner and even explain the things that might help them to mitigate their own property. That being said, after the Marshall Fire, we are now in the hole about 400 assessments. So we're working on how we're going to catch up and move forward on that. So that's an example of taking it from the biggest landowner in the city to each individual landowner, what we're doing for them. So right now, this is actually a master plan goal of the fire department, is to get detailed home assessments to 60% of the interface. And I think we're somewhere around 10 right now. But it is part of our master plan to get out there and do as many voluntary, these are all voluntary assessments that people would, if they want that for their home. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to take people to alert and warning, and we brought with us our 911 Center Director, Brad Riggin, to kind of explain how alert and warning goes and what types of alert and warning are available. Before I go there, let me just say this. I know this has been a big issue with a few of the last few fires, especially with Marshall Fire and the speed with which that happened. I can tell you as a member of the senior city team and incident command, it is scary to have a fire go that quickly out there and not have given evacuation orders out there promptly. We're, in a perfect world, we'd be able to notify folks in a way that didn't clog the streets, and we were able to tell them where to go. They're able to get out of areas quickly, and we can do it in an orderly fashion. That's a perfect world. We'd have the resources to potentially convert streets from two-way to one-way, but also allow responders to get in because they need to get in and while everyone is going out. So those are things we know we have to work on and talk about. But in a perfect world, that's what we'd want, and not over notify, which I know has happened and has been in the news a few times. So I'll just say that up front. And then I'll hand it over if Brad is on to let him kind of explain how alert and warning works for the city specifically.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
There he is.
I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for allowing me some time here. I do want to say that a number of staff have worked hard over the last year to implement new technology and improve our alert and warning program. And I think it's important that you're giving me the opportunity to explain how this program works, the capabilities, and also the limitations that we're trying to overcome. So I'd like to start by just kind of going over the process that happens when an alert is sent out to the public. It obviously starts with an incident where there's a hazard that's threatening life safety, or property in the community. An incident commander on scene will direct our dispatch center, 911 dispatch center, to send an alert or a warning. Our dispatchers are trained to ask for specific information that fits into pre-drawn templates in our system. We use templates so that messaging is consistent and accurate. And dispatchers need to know the location. Usually this means street segments or a radius around a certain area. What kind of hazard it is, a wildfire, active farmer, flooding, what action the public should take, evacuation, shelter in place, climb to higher ground, and the duration if it's known at the time. Once dispatchers have this information, they can go into our system, which is called Everbridge, enter the information in, draw out the targeted area on a map, and send the notification. So all in all, if things work correctly, we can do this very accurately and quickly when things line up. I do want to talk about the alerting options that we have. Basically, they're broken out into two categories. The first is kind of the traditional mass notification that we're used to. The county, in Boulder County, we've used it for a decade or more. Through the Everbridge system, there's two ways that citizens or the public can get notifications through this system. The first is CenturyLink landline or a Comcast voice over IP line. So if you have those in your home, those are automatically put into our system and refreshed on a monthly basis. The second is to create an opt-in account in the Everbridge system. And this is where a member of the public can go in, create an account, put in addresses that they want to be alerted to emergencies near or around, and what kind of contact methods they want to be alerted to, cell phones, emails, etc. So that's kind of the traditional mass notification that we used for the better part of a decade. Recently, with developments on wildfires and other incidents within the city and around the state, we have started implementing integrated public alert and warning system, also referred to as IPAWS. This system is facilitated through FEMA, and it's a technology that allows us to alert the public in a couple of different ways. One is the emergency alert system, which goes out through television and radio. Another is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association or Administration, weather radio. So NOAA weather radio, those folks that have those radios can get these notifications as well. And lastly, and what we really liked was wireless emergency alerts, also referred to as WEA. And these go out to cell phones, regardless of if they've opted in a targeted area through cell phones in cooperation with cell phone providers. The reason that we wanted to integrate this capability was because it will hit people outside of their homes, their businesses. If they're out on trails, enjoying the open space, if they're unhoused and they're not in our system, these notifications can still hit those folks. That's the reason and the benefits that we saw and why we implemented it. During the NCAR fire, the decision was made to use IPAWS notifications and wireless emergency alerts, mainly because of the location. We knew people were out on the trails. We knew the public was out enjoying the day. The weather was nice, and we needed to notify those folks that were away from their homes or their businesses or an opt-in address that they put in. So while we've seen the benefits of this alerting, it is important to also point out the limitations. And A couple of limitations lie with the wireless emergency alerts, and the first is what the chief alluded to is over notification. First, it's important to state that wireless emergency alerts are under the authority of the FCC, and the FCC monitors and works with cell phone providers to offer this technology. The technology kind of spans a vast array. Either you have the new technology in your phone, if you have a newer handset with the WIA technology, or if you have an older handset, cellular handset, with the older technology. If you have an older handset, there's a chance you're going to receive a wireless emergency alert well outside the targeted area at this time. And that's just a limitation of the system. The best the system can do at this point with a newer handset, with the new technology, is bleed over 1/10 of a mile or less. And FCC estimates about 35% of phones on the market right now have that newer technology. So anytime we send this type of alert, it's going to bleed over, and it may bleed over far depending on the age of your handset. The second limitation we're aware of is the character limit. So if you have an older handset and technology, we're limited to 90 characters on that alert. So that's not a lot for us to detail the emergency and what you need to do and where it's at. So that's another limitation that we're trying to work around as well. One limitation that we did find after the NCAR fire was through the NOAA weather radio alerts. And we discovered that there are several third-party apps that picked up the alert over the radio and rebroadcast it to their users. So Google Alerts is a good example of this. There were some people in other states that got these alerts, and also the information wasn't consistent. Some of these alerts had the entire county as evacuated, which was inaccurate. So those are some of the limitations with the system. We are working to overcome those. One of the things that we're doing is we're having after action reports, debriefs. After each alert is sent, and we've learned a lot. After the NCAR fire, we put a couple of improvements into place already. We are no longer using the NOAA weather radio until that technology is improved. We're also adding a 360 character message to our alerts for those with newer handsets, so they have a little more information. And with the help of OEM and Director Chard over there, we've set it up so any alert that we send will post on the OEM website almost immediately with a picture of the map and the affected area. So that's somewhere that the public can go to immediately, see the alert, and know if they're in the affected area. Beyond that, we work on ongoing training continually. We have monthly training scenarios, and we just work to improve the alert and program as we go along. That's a very brief and general overview of our program. And that's all I have right now. I can kick back to Mike unless there's questions.
Thanks, Brad. And so from this slide and the next one here, I wanted to share a couple of post-NCAR changes because we know there were some issues with the Boulder ODM website. And basically what we've implemented since NCAR is we want to push folks to the Boulder OEM website. We want folks to get their information from one source of information. So as quickly as possible now, we'll have our lead PIOs launching the emergency status and start posting on social media channels as much as possible to make sure that we're getting information timely out there, because we had some complaints last time that people were going there and there wasn't any info for them to follow. So that's something we definitely changed right away as a result of the NCAR fire. Only got a couple slides to go before we ask council questions, but I did want to push it over to, if we go to the next slide, it's not much on it, just about recovery issues. And I wanted to invite the City County Officer of Disaster Management Director, Mike Chard, to speak to that just briefly about recovery issues in general and share that with the City Council and community. So I think Mike's available. I hope he's.
Yep. Thanks, Chief. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thanks. Good evening, Council. A lot of folks think that recovery begins after the response ends, and really recovery begins in the early stages of a disaster. And once the EOC is up and going, we have 30 different emergency support functions that can be brought in through the EOC for coordination support. One of them is called impact assessment. The impact assessment team starts looking at the type of disaster we're having. So in essence, a wildfire, start looking at if it's impacting homes, businesses, critical infrastructure, and then starts feeding that into our overall situational awareness. We will then lean forward, and as the EOC grows and continues the recovery mission, the response structure is actually starting to wind down. And this is what we call a transition phase from response to recovery, and the EOC working with these ESFs fills that space and continues to manage until the city manager gets the recovery structure in place that she would want to have, working with department directors. The transition phase, we continue to work on completing damage assessment. Usually disaster assistance center starts to get opened up. Law enforcement is our police department is doing site access control to make sure that we're not letting people back into areas that have been evacuated. And then we put a lot of coordination structure down to help with messaging. And we have a lot of volunteers, organizations that may be coming in, and just kind of wherever people seem to be struggling to connect, share information, and operationally, force multiply, our jobs to come in and help facilitate that. We do have a recovery plan. It's the framework for the city on how we establish a recovery structure. That includes responsibilities for city departments and what roles and responsibilities they'll assume in this recovery structure. Obviously, is not limited to the city. And these large disasters, recovery efforts will be cross-jurisdictional and bring in other support resources from other municipalities, special districts, and even other county departments to be successful as we get into recovery. Some of the challenges we've learned, we've had a lot of opportunity to do recovery. Is always getting people back into their homes and getting businesses open. Another big one is insurance gaps. People start getting into that world of now, how do I file my claim? They start discovering whether or not they're insured properly. They start getting into also the process of how to make claims. These can be challenges for folks. We try to provide nonprofit groups to help people navigate the insurance landscape. We get a disaster assistance center open. This is the first point of case management, where folks now are kind of taking assessment into what impacts they have in their personal life or their business. The Disaster Assistance Center starts to get people connected to safety nets and resources that may help them in their recovery efforts personally or even professionally. And then the other big challenges we get is then debris management. And for folks that are well insured, this is less of a struggle. For folks that are underinsured or have gaps in their insurance, then debris programs become a challenge. And if we have a federal disaster, there are federal programs that help fill some of that void. But if not, then this falls back into a local program. And that is an area where we can see things kind of slow down a bit in the recovery effort. And then the real big two remaining pieces there is the long-term recovery. After we get out of the EOC, we get into our city recovery structure. That's usually the short, medium range, but then there's a sort of longer-term piece. Response is a shorter duration of the total disaster continuum, and we measure response sometimes in hours, days, and weeks, but recovery gets measured in weeks, months, and years. So getting into that longer-term structure becomes also a challenge, because it starts speaking to what capacity do we have in government to be able to support that. And things that can help with it is looking at bringing in contractors, expanding staff, or bringing folks in as term employees to help with specific recovery missions. So the things we have that are going pretty well for us, we have good multi-jurisdictional cooperation through our multi-agency coordination group, especially in our damage assessment teams. We can handle a lot, as we have in multiple disasters here in recent years. We have very strong local VOAD, and that stands for Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. We have a local VOAD organization that helps with interfacing when we're bringing in federal VOAD organizations. We can get a disaster assistance center up and going right away. We have plans around site access control, debris management, and good, strong community engagement. Even with all these capabilities in place, recovery is always a challenge, and each disaster is unique and will create unique challenges. and each one will expose vulnerabilities in our capabilities and our structure. So the mantra there is it's strong to have a lot of adaptive capacity so we can anchor in, develop, and deliver services to the community. And ahead for us in this space is we have a recovery plan that does need to be updated this year. It's due this year. And then one of the things we're working on is a extensive cross-departmental tabletop that will focus on recovery, not the response side, to help make sure that the planning effort that we are using to update our plan is at least calibrated and confirmed through a tabletop scenario. And we can be confident that at least that our capabilities are holding up through that planning phase. That's all I have, Chief. Back to you.
Thanks, Mike. If we can just go to the last slide, I'll just sum it up here. This is by no means comprehensive, but this is just a list of some of the opportunities that we've identified going forward that will probably need a lot more work on. Just a couple of examples, as you can read, outreach and how we help citizens help themselves and harden themselves, not just their homes, but having go bags, things like that. How do we leverage what's in the community and all the volunteerism and the expertise that's out there, and how they can help all of us, because it's a community effort to make this community hardened against wildfire. So those are just examples. All of these plan updates and even climate initiatives will require probably some resource needs or resource reallocations, we know, but we'll need more conversations internally around that. So if we go to the last slide, I'll just sum up the questions that we thought might be useful, at least to start to chew on, and that is whether council is interested in quarterly updates on the topic of resilience, and whether you want to focus specifically on climate resilience and emergency response. Any other areas of concern that you've heard about today? I mean, I like to use the pun. We had you drinking from a fire hose tonight. There's a million things. Are there areas that you'd like us to explore that weren't mentioned, or even were mentioned, but you don't think we're doing enough or should think about? And then I did have a thing in the chat about what is a wildland urban interface, and that is, by definition, really a certain, we'll call it distance from the edge of the city that borders wildland land. You also have grassland. It all really boils down to open space around, and then how far in the city. Based on the Marshall Fire, we even have to probably rethink what a wildland urban interface actually means because of how that spread. But those are the big questions. And if we could just, I will bring these back up, but I just wanted to bring that NCAR story map QR code up there for members of the viewing public who may be interested in looking at the story map that we put together for the NCAR fire. So that's only a couple of slides down, but that might be of interest to folks if they want. We couldn't go into detail there, and as you can see, I apologize, we went a little over, but we'll turn it back to Nuria for any questions that might be out there.
I think we're good on our end, and I'll turn it back to Tara, but I'll just say that I'm glad we were wrapping up, because I know that we have another big presentation today, and Miss Allie Rhodes may be kicking you under the virtual table to finish up so we can get to parks. So Tara?
Well, Mike, that was a fantastic presentation, and it was very detailed, and I'm sure that it has started lowering the anxiety of a lot of our community members to know we're in such great hands and so organized. And also, I have a new respect for cattle. I just want to say that. I am going to ask the city council, does anybody have any clarifying questions? So before we discuss, let's talk about questions first. See any hands raised for clarifying questions for staff? This is my first time looking at what that looks like. So Nuri, you can help me if you see it and I don't.
Well, I see, and I don't know what order, but I see Rachel, Aaron, and Mark, and Lauren.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that was the right order that they came up in. So my first question is for Nuria while you're unmuted. Hate to sound like a broken record, but this was something that a couple of us lifted up at the retreat, wanting to have added to the work plan. And now we're talking about revisiting this quarterly. Is this something that we could or should add to the work plan?
Well, I appreciate the question. I would say that generally we consider this as part of our work plan. I think the question perhaps more aptly is whether council wants to lift this up as one of the council priorities, because we do have this contemplated in the work that we're doing. That would, of course, generate what we think would be those quarterly updates. We would then have to work on what is the action item that you'd like to see as part of that council priority. But I hope that we share today that this is something that we are continuing to work on. And so the choice is yours in terms of how you want to lift that up and if there is a particular action item you want to highlight. But I hope you're hearing today from staff. We are on it. We are moving forward. We have this. We don't necessarily, depending on what that particular ask, if there is one, believe that that would require additional resource because we're already working on some of that right now. So we defer to council on whether you want us to lift that up out of the joint work plan and lift that up as a council priority.
Okay. Thanks for that. I'll go back to that as part of the discussion. And then my second clarifying question is, fire and floods, I would say similarly terrifying for communities. And I know after some bigger floods, we hired outside consultants and experts to help us, map out the best way to proceed on certain creeks and things like that. Are we doing anything like that with fire planning? Like I'm thinking about evacuation routes as an example. I know that those have been a concern for people that we get jammed up. So is that something that we already are outsourcing or we could outsource?
So the simple answer is we could outsource that. So the community wildfire protection plan is up for an update. Even our structure protection plan, which details how we'll fight fire and how we'll designate areas of the city, which involves how we would evaluate getting folks out or protecting structures. Those are up for refresh. So we have a conversation internally about resources we'll need to get that done. That needs to happen. So that is in process. And we're trying to figure out whether that's going to be outside help or we've got the expertise or we just need some additional support to do it.
Okay. All right. That's all I have for now. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Aaron?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for that extremely informative presentation and for putting this together on pretty short notice and for the coordination between the different departments. I really appreciate the partnerships we have in the county with the OEM, and Mike Chard, thanks for being here. So, huge appreciations all the way around. I just have one question. So the alerting system, there was a great explanation of how that works, and it was great that we were able to do the WIA alerts, and having to go to a few extra people is preferable to not getting to enough people. One question I did have from some community members was, in what circumstances our siren system gets used? Because I had some people say, well, why weren't the sirens turned on? And so I wonder if somebody could address when we do or do not use the siren system in the town.
I can kick it off, and then whoever wants to jump in can gladly go there. So the siren system itself, we've used it in the past, but we've had limited success with it. And we use them during the floods. They don't quite work as well as we thought. In fact, in some cases, they actually had people go towards the danger rather than away from. And so we do need a way to notify people who don't have all the electronics, bells and whistles and the Twitter and stuff like that. And there's no substitute, obviously, for, like in the NCAR fire, we had people on the trail. We had to get them off the trail. We're sending people up in the trail to get them off. You can obviously see the wildfire, but that doesn't mean people are going to get off the mountain quickly. So being able to actually tell people what's going on is ideal. The sirens were supposed to kind of do that, and we would test them and they were muffled. You couldn't quite hear what it was saying. What was the message? And in some cases it was just, oh, that means the flood's coming. Let's all go check out the creek. And it didn't really work the way we wanted it to. It's also very old technology, so fixing them and even replacing them could be substantially expensive. If there are better alternatives, that's what we're kind of talking about internally and more interested in. And I think, Mike, you might have a better insight into some of the other technologies that are out there that we're looking at. But that's one of the reasons why sirens were not, I think, as enthusiastic about them as an alternative notification system as some might think. Hope that part helps.
Yeah, Mike, I'll Chief, add on to that. One of the things as an alternative technology is looking at what's called LRADs. It's a long range acoustic hailing device, specifically designed to be, if you can't put a tone with it, but really designed around giving voice direction and making that clear, and being able then to communicate protective measures as opposed to with the sirens, which is more of an awareness type device. It gives general message and says wildfires in the area, be prepared to evacuate, not very directive. So there might be a better way to do that outdoor warning system with modern technology than something that's been around. And many of our sirens are getting to service life or past it. So it's looking at that time of what's the best way to achieve that outdoor warning system.
Okay.
Thanks for the explanation. That's all I had.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to Mark.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. Appreciate it. We've thinned, if I recall correctly, you said we've thinned about 2,000 acres out of 46,000. Obviously, not all acres are going to be eligible for thinning. How many are, and under what time schedule will we be getting to the rest?
You're muted, Dan.
Over the past 10 years, we've accomplished about 2,200 acres of thinning. That represents about 80% of what was called for in the Forest Ecosystem Management Plan. So we still have a little bit to go with that. 2 years ago, we, in talking with our forest ecosystem staff, we have decided to put the majority of our attention right along sort of the Shanahan Ridge, the urban interface area. We did some thinning up in the Red Rocks area. So adjusting a little bit in terms of what was initially called for in terms of our sequencing and concentrating a little bit more on the urban interface direct area. Only about 25% of our 46,000 acres is in a forest habitat area. So there's also strategic reasons why you wouldn't necessarily thinning all of that is a priority. For instance, there might be some cool north facing shaded areas that, due to the topography of the such, just presents a lot less risk for catastrophic wildfire than certain other areas. So there's actually very just strategic reasons of why a particular forest stand might rise to the level of priority for a thinning project or not.
Thank you. And are there any man-made alterations that we ought to be looking at and at the interface between the residential communities and the open space, so fire breaks, for instance, to create a greater resilience in the event of a fire moving into our communities?
Well, right now, I mentioned the fact that there's an active program at the staff level that's going on between fire department and open space. And one of the things that we're doing is identifying potential strategies that we haven't considered before and throwing them up in a spreadsheet and then doing some prioritization out of that. Is this realistic? Can this be done? Is it achievable? Do we have the capacity to do it? And so some ideas that maybe we weren't considering before might be on the table for us to look at. And certainly that could be one of them, Mark. Obviously, there are some areas where that already exists. I'm thinking of Bluebell Road running up Chautauqua, a very good access road that happens to be right along the urban interface. There's other sort of, I guess you would call it, still some low-level intensity projects. For instance, what is the material of our fencing made of? Where is our grazing units? Is there a way to shift grazing in a way that we can hit more fuel mitigation in areas that that we view maybe higher priority that we haven't gotten to yet? Some of our properties are unleased. Should we put them in active agricultural leasing? Of course, everything comes up with a little bit of a trade-off. For instance, if you put cows right up against a backyard, you get a little pushback at times. I think cows are more appreciated right now than they've ever been. So I like to hear that. But there has been a little bit of resistance in the past of having grazing too close to the urban interface. But your initial remark, Mark, is likely to end up on this spreadsheet of ideas that will be sussed out and sorted out.
Well, I look forward to hearing your thinking on that. My last question, and this may be for our police department as opposed to any other department. Under current conditions, fireworks have gone from being a nuisance, an unpleasant nuisance, to something a lot more dangerous. And as anybody on Uni Hill can tell you, or even in my neighborhood of Lower Chautauqua, fireworks are going on all the time. Is there anything to be done about that, just from a fire suppression point of view? Because everybody can live through a little noise, but it's becoming a dangerous activity. I don't know if anybody can respond to it.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond. I'm not quite sure what to say in terms of the fire suppression. I'll leave that to Chief Calderazzo. But as you know, we do our best to enforce the fireworks ordinances. It's often difficult to catch the perpetrators because by the time the boom has gone off and we're trying to find them, they've scurried away and it's dark, and it's often difficult to apprehend people. But we do the best we can, especially during the summer. We increase patrols around the 4th of July because we know that's a high period for fireworks use. And it remains a municipal offense as an unclassified misdemeanor. Chief Calderazzo, I don't know if you have anything to add on the fire suppression side.
Okay.
No, they're obviously illegal, but we'd need more. I suppose. I don't know if that's enough of a deterrent. What's on the books today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing that I think some people don't realize that in Boulder, it's not just merely lighting off fireworks. It's illegal to possess them, period, which is a pretty strong stance that we have compared to a lot of other jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Next, we have Matt Benjamin.
Lauren's up. Let's let Lauren go ahead.
Oh, Lauren, sorry about that.
It's all good.
Still learning.
It's all good. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate that you've already addressed so many of my questions and concerns. So good job. I really appreciate that. But I did still have a couple of other outstanding ones. I'm not sure if this is our police department or Boulder OEM that this, or maybe Nuria, you can help me direct this properly. But so other than the future resource plan or response plan, have we evaluated and come up with any modifications that we would be enacting in terms of closure and traffic direction after the Marshall Fire? I was just wondering if there was more detail on what the thinking is there.
Yeah, I'll ask whether I know that there have been some learnings, and I know that there are a variety of factors that go into that. So maybe I'll ask Carrie if you wanted to start, and then Mike, or well, I guess the mics, if you all have something to add, that'd be great.
Sure. So I'll just add a couple things. Chief Calderazzo mentioned in the very beginning that there were some fortunate circumstances on the day of the in-car fire. And one was that this fire kicked off at a time that we had 2 overlapping shifts. So our staffing was better than usual. That said, we were still challenged between taking care of other emergency calls in the city, doing door-to-door evacuation notices at the very western edge of the city along like Stony Brook Road, and also trying to control traffic. As we talked about earlier, in the ideal world, we'd have this neat, orderly, staged evacuation where we would move out the people in harm's way first, followed by sort of the second wave and the third wave, and it would all go nice and orderly. But that works against the idea of having mass notifications like a WIA that often get beyond our initial control and our initial intent, right? So mass notification and orderly evacuations, I think, are at odds with each other. That said, about 90 minutes into the in-car fire, we had 18 officers and about 10 state troopers, and we were beginning to get control of Broadway and Table Mesa. Broadway and Greenbrier as two major exit points if we needed to try to go 4 lanes of traffic out. To do that, we had to shut down Broadway for a period of time. We also had the State Patrol shut down northbound Highway 93 at Highway 128 to lessen the traffic impact on the city. But anytime you're trying to move 15, 20,000 people all at once, it's going to be a big challenge. And our roadways really are not designed for that, right? They're designed for traffic calming and slowing people down, not always allowing full access and full flow out. That said, and Mike can probably go into some detail, but we've been looking at a product that would help us sort of pre-map and pre-plan for traffic control points. It's a mapping system we're looking at. I think that will help us going forward to better sort of pre-game these situations. Of course, we never know exactly where the next fire is going to kick off. But unfortunately, we've had some experiences of years ago, we evacuated all of North Dakota Ridge subdivision. We ended up evacuating a good portion of South Boulder on the in-car fire. We were prepared to evacuate a good portion of Central Boulder during the Dome fire in 2013 or 14. So unfortunately, we've had some practice. But anytime we're trying to move an entire section of the city out through choke points, there's going to be problems, and it's going to take time for us to ramp up enough resources to control major intersections. But it's obviously something that we are looking to improve.
Comments I would have related to that for council to hear. To the chief's point, looking at technology to help us not just with our response planning, but also be able to tilt that towards community preparedness, increase people's knowledge of the zones they're in, the routes out would be one way. Part of the after action reports we've been doing on these fires is also making sure that we're operationally updating our plans and procedures and SOPs to make sure that they're current. I think there was a lot of emphasis on door-to-door searches. We haven't talked about that, but that is also a very effective way to move people, because even with all the great technology that Brad was talking about, still putting people in neighborhoods, knocking on doors, making sure people are clear is a priority, and also controlling traffic control points. So we're starting to see that, especially with WIAs coming in play. It's kind of changed that dynamic now where they're both equally as important. And then policy-wise, to speak to I like the way the chief put it, was orderly evacuations and mass notifications kind of work against one another. We are part of a 4-county effort right now. The FCC has got an open period of time for comments related to how to improve the wireless emergency technology and see how we can make that policy shift at the federal level through this iPause capability. Because really, to make the WIA really effective for us long-term, it has to find a way to be much more geo-fenced and surgical, as opposed to just being this butter knife and trying to slice through this stuff, and it's not very clean. And I think we'll get there, but a couple of pieces will be getting the policy change at the federal level, some FCC requirement, and then over time, this technology, the older technology that our director from the 911 Center was talking about, will eventually be out of the system. There is a regulation that says all new phones from February 2022 have to comply with the newer standard for wireless emergency alerts. Will eventually get that narrowed down a bit and will help with some of those challenges that our first responders face when they're out there in that evacuation environment.
And I'll just add real quick. We know there's a ways to go. These ideas of planning zones, educating the community. There are areas in California where they help residents know your zone, and so they even know what evacuation zone they're in and where they're expected to go. We're nowhere near there, and we've got a ways to go. And we know those are things we can do in terms of outreach. That's kind of what we're referring to in the slide on the opportunities piece.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're going to go to Matt and then.
Oh, wait, Tara, I had a couple.
Yep.
I mean,
Yes.
those were great answers.
We're trying to stay on schedule, but do your thing. We want to
Sorry.
hear from you.
So my next one was, and I'm not sure who this is to, but there was a discussion about potentially updating the WUI zones and also building codes. I know the building code piece, we're already looking at updating building codes. Are we looking at fire, more intense regulations around combustibility as part of that update? And then also, do we have it, are we going to schedule time to dive into the WUI zones and look at increasing those or not, or adjusting them?
So I'll just say real quick, we are required by ordinance to evaluate the WUI designation every 3 years, I think it is. So we have to look at this anyway, and that's if we did nothing about adopting a new updated version of the Wildland Urban Interface Code. We have to look at that. That of course carries with it all the extra regulations, but again, that is not retroactive. That is just for new construction and renovations.
Thank you. And then a last quick one. Dan, I think this is for you. So you were mentioning thinning and kind of where the thinning is happening. And I noticed on the maps that in the canyons that I didn't see thinning and things, and you were talking about not doing cooler areas. Is that kind of because, does that relate? We're not thinning north sides and in sort of deep ravines and things like that because of the microclimates that are there?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally that's correct, Lauren. I mean, it's not to say you would never see any thinning prescriptions on a north-facing slope, but certainly our vegetation and forestry health professionals are looking at those type of things. What is the risk factor? What is the health, forest health? So just overall forest health is the umbrella for all this, because if you have a healthy forest, you tend to have more resilient forest, and then you tend to have less catastrophic fire risk. So yes, you do tend to see some of those other depressed risk factors are involved in such things as steep northern cool facing slopes and some of those microclimates in general. But that's not to say that you would never see a prescription carried out in something that might be north facing.
Thank you.
Great questions, Lauren, and thank you. And again, I apologize for cutting you off before. Okay, we go to Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, as it's been said before, a big thanks to Dan and the chief and Mike at OEM, just all the work, and certainly Boulder Sheriff, Boulder Police, all our partners to get us where we are, but not to be lost that we got lucky with the NCAR fire. So as much as we got lucky, it presented such a great learning opportunity without the devastation of life or property. And so thinking about how do we push the envelope on our resiliency is something that's been sort of focused for me. And so I want to circle back to a question that Mark brought up with regards to fire barrier and stuff. And so I guess it's a general question for Dan. Our open space charter very specifically defines the allowable uses for our open space. And so I'm curious if any potential or new ways in which we can use our open space to protect our community runs into or perhaps runs against perhaps some of those allowable uses in how we're thinking. And so I'm sort of just curious in that regards, because I want to sort of be thinking real broadly with regards to how maybe the open space can be leveraged as a means of protecting our community. So that's really like a question. It's like, is blading west of homes, going to be an allowable use? And I would just want to make sure, are we baking those things in so that future generations are largely able to be stewards of our community and environment without thinking about our open space becoming a vehicle from which natural disasters can sweep through our community?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. I would say in general, high level terms, that the open space charter purposes could come into play on certain specific ideas that might come to bear. But I would also say that the charter purposes allows for the management of lands. And so, for instance, we place prairie dog barriers, fence barriers on our property for prairie dog management. And so, you know, a structure on open space, but used for management purposes. We certainly have access roads and trails and that sort of things that could be viewed as a structure, even though the charter says no structures on open space. But, you know, because it's for the management purpose, it is allowable under the charter. So I would say that many ideas that we could consider probably wouldn't run afoul with the charter purposes, but it's certainly, but there could be examples that definitely might, in which we might have a conflict there. More importantly, I think the question for us would be, us meaning all of us, is the trade-offs. You know, you do one thing and you might have a trade-off on another. For instance, let's get rid of every shrub within a half mile of the urban interface. Well, it so happens that shrub habitats tends to be the most important habitat for our songbirds. It happens to be a very important habitat for threatened species. So, you know, I think the trade-off implication is probably the more important component of how to evaluate these things than whether or not it can be done under the charter purposes. But I would say charter purposes could come into play depending on the idea.
I appreciate that, Dan. Yeah, I've sort of thought about those potentials too and wondered what would come into play. So I appreciate that. The other, and I've got just sort of two questions. There's a slurry more, but I want to keep respectful of some time here. One of them has to do with going back to the 1994 shake shingle ordinance. Ironically, a couple of us were on a bike ride and ran across some apartments that had wood shingling on their siding. And so I'm curious about whether or not that ordinance was purely designated for roofing and whether siding was not included. Because again, I think of, you know, there's a lot of people we've seen, sadly, that maybe some of our apartments are not necessarily prepared even for local fire, and we're displacing families. So I'm kind of curious about where that ordinance's boundaries are and how we can maybe tighten it up so that we can really start to, you know, gain some resiliency, certainly with apartments and considering, you know, 53% of our community rents. So just sort of thinking about some of those equity issues as a part of those ordinances.
But I can at least say that it was roofs. It was about the roofs. The WUI would cover the siding, or the WUI Wildland Urban Interface Code would cover the siding, but only for, that one is not retroactive. So it would have to be enacted retroactively and probably with the same kind of provisions to give people time to comply for that to have the same effect.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And my last question, as I come to it, centers around resident and sort of community education. I grew up in Southern California, and wildfires were a frequent issue for me. I had my house partially burned by a wildfire in the late 80s, been evacuated numerous times. And one of the things that we always had, though, was very clear understanding of, and I think, you know, Chief, you mentioned this, when a fire comes, because they tend to come from generally one direction, where you go, when you go, like it gave you very clear sense of that. It gave you you always had a list of what you needed to pack. It told you how to prepare your house when to leave, you know, close your windows, do not run ventilation, you know, I mean, all those things, you know, clearance, you name it. I mean, you had that list, you knew what you were doing, and you were empowered to protect your home long before, and people long before the fire came. How are we building that capacity, and how long might that take to sort of build that into what we're doing in our community, so that even if the WUI now covers all of Boulder in our new definition, you know, I just want to get your thoughts on the process in which we can build that sort of education throughout our community.
It's a fantastic question. We got to do better there. There's no question about that. And I would say that it's a conversation we're going to have internally about needs around that. What can we do to improve not just the outreach, but what is the message and how do we get it out there? And do that through our normal budget allocation process, as well as what can we do today? I do have resources available today. So that's a conversation I want us as a team having, especially now that we're a little post-COVID. We struggled certainly with doing detailed home assessments. We even put them on hold. We simply didn't want to be vectors ourselves. But I know that we can really push this forward and need to. So I'll just say that as the fire chief of a very wildfire risky community, we must do better around those areas, and we will be working on that.
Thanks, Chief. And you've got a partner in me here to help out, having been through that enough in my childhood. And lastly, I'll just part with something that the Chief mentioned earlier. We have our Senator Fenberg to thank for securing funding for this Firehawk helicopter. Carries 1,000 gallons of water. It's a workhorse, but we should be at the top of the pecking order to maybe secure that to our region. So hopefully that's something we can do and work with our partners to get that done. But that would be a great opportunity for our community and our resiliency. So I'll be done there.
Thanks, Matt. Great questions and great comments. And thanks, Mike. Rachel, do you have another question, or is your hand?
Real quick, yep. Just there was a slide that mentioned volunteering opportunities, and I've had some community members ask, like, do we need people to volunteer to help clean debris from the last fire? So just wondering, are there current volunteer opportunities, and where would we direct people to if so?
So we're working on that. I've had a lot of folks reach out to me as well. We're trying to figure out, we have a volunteer guiding coalition. We have that capacity, but I don't think we've had an opportunity to huddle and talk about how we utilize all the volunteer, all the people that want to volunteer, not just for this event, but for different areas, or even in preparation for it. That people say, look, I do this for a living. I work with insurance, and I can help you guys with some of these. So those are the things I want to coordinate citywide. I don't want to just do one-offs or a single department. So we're trying to figure out how we can sort of utilize that and do it in a coordinated way across the city. So admittedly, we haven't been very good at it yet, but we're going to work on that.
Thanks.
Great. Well, I want to move it along to, maybe we can put up the staff's questions, and let's
Nicole
go
has her
to,
hands up.
sorry.
Nicole
See how
had
bad
her
I
hand
am
I
with
just
this
wanted to
hand?
be first for answering staff questions.
Ah, okay, good. You snuck that hand in there. I didn't see it. Okay, you can be first. So we're going to answer staff's questions and any other discussion. Nicole, take it away.
Thank you. And this is assuming that I'm remembering them correctly. So staff, please let me know if I'm not.
You want
yes,
to put the questions
think,
up on the slide, on the screen?
Yeah, that may be helpful.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I think, our questions here tonight sort of show you, this is an area of interest for us as residents, as well as in our role as policymakers. So I think quarterly updates, in my opinion, would be really helpful, and I think informative and valuable for the community. If I'm remembering correctly, the next one was around areas to elevate in those updates. And I think some of my colleagues here have hit on some of the things that I was interested in hearing elevated. Rachel, you just mentioned one around how people can help. I think, the more we get information out to the community about what they can do to help with these efforts, the better, all of us will feel. It always feels better to be acting than, just hearing about these problems. I think kind of along those lines, I'm curious about private resources that may be available. So Chief, you mentioned having a program that kind of goes around and tells people how their homes are doing in terms of kind of being fire, or being, I think you talked about it as hardness to fire. And I'm just curious, if people were interested in doing that on their own, are there resources that you would recommend they go to, right? So that we don't have kind of people just picking anybody out there, who says, oh yeah, we can completely help you with that. But, they may or may not be reputable. So what are those resources that you might have available or recommend for individual homeowners or people who would want to start doing some of this work on their own? I think, Matt, you were kind of alluding to policy changes. I'd be very interested in hearing about policy changes that you would recommend that we consider as a council that would help us. And the other thing that I kind of think about is around methods for kind of strengthening our neighborhoods and communities and the connections that we have to each other. I was talking with Curtis Johnson in the county sheriff's office, and he was talking about a program out of New Zealand where there's kind of a group that comes in and they work with neighborhoods to help people understand, who are your neighbors and what skills do they have and how might you, come together in a time of crisis to kind of help each other and pick up slack, especially in the case of when services may be gone for a couple of days. So I think those kinds of things. And the other thing that is on my mind, I think, especially after the horrific news we received last week that one of our community members died in Washington, D.C., protesting the climate crisis, is just thinking about mental health resources as well. What's out there, what's available. None of this stuff is easy to deal with. I think that's true for all of you who are on the front lines and those of us in the community who are watching all this happen. And what resources do we have as a community to help people who are really struggling with the times that we're living in and these dangers and the ways that our climate is changing? Thank you. And I really want to extend my thanks. It's very clear in your presentation tonight that you're doing a lot to protect our community and all of us who live and work here. So thank you very much.
Nicole, that was great. I really appreciated that list. And I'm going to take a few minutes to answer the question now. I would definitely like quarterly reports. That would be great. I think it makes the community feel more secure, as well as brings us together. And I want to agree with Nicole on mental health. I'm concerned about how it's affecting our kids, especially those that have already had to evacuate 3 times. So I was talking to some community members about that. And if we could come together as a community for mental health, and especially for our children when it comes to stress and wildfire, I think that would be a great thing. I am wondering, Mike, this might not be for you. I know that in the Marshall Fire, the grasslands were a big problem. And I'm thinking about our non-cow oriented grasslands. So one community member mentioned the grass, I guess it could be on the median. It goes from NCAR all the way down to Broadway. And what do you think about, what can we do about that to make sure that if the fire jumps, it doesn't jump to the grasslands that are in the city limits, let's just say. We've had a few problems with that already. So should we have mitigation for that? What should we do? Like, do we have a plan? So that's another thing I'd like to see mentioned. Another thing is, in terms of South Boulder, I would personally love to see a pilot program, because I'm really loving this whole discussion on volunteers. And South Boulder, I know West of Broadway and even East of Broadway is raring to go. So I would love to see some sort of a pilot program, maybe starting there, where we could get block captains and organize so that people don't feel alone, especially thinking about people's pets that happened in the Marshall Fire. And a lot of people were out of their houses and their pets didn't live. So what can we have some sort of a neighborhood organization in terms of pets and just knowing your neighbors, so everybody knows when something is happening and there might be a block captain to call. I'm very excited that there is going to be a website up where people will know to go, because that was a big problem. And I'm really happy that you're already handling that one. I do know that when I was watching the fire start, that was the Marshall Fire from South Boulder, I did notice, I wasn't sure if it was that one or the NCAR. I was standing at a condominium area and the sprinklers went on the urban wildfire interface, right on the perimeter, but they went up in the air. So they were so the water was evaporating. It certainly wasn't going to do anything. And so another thing I'd like to see is, can we have a plan for the many stakeholders, the condominiums, the businesses, the homes that are right on the edge, right on the perimeter? I think that would be helpful. I'm on the board of Chautauqua, and they are super organized when it comes to their plans that they've been working on for quite a while, but especially in the last 3 months. And so I learned a lot from them as well. So thank you, Chautauqua, for teaching me all you did. And let me just see if I have any more questions or comments before I let the next person go. Okay, let me go on to my little Word document. Take 1 second. Everybody, oh yes, my last was postcards. And the good old days in the mail, and some of the some of our seniors might not be as savvy tech-wise. I know I'm not. And so postcards would be great, perhaps every quarter or every 6 months, like what to put in your to-go bag, what website should you go to? These types of things that are constant reminders to the community who might not go on the city website or might not go onto a website, but will be in a big panic. And they could, Mike, I know you talked about magnets. They can go right to their refrigerator and look and see what they need to do immediately. And I think that'll relieve a lot of the anxiety. So that's all I have. And I see a bunch of other hands. Matt, Rachel, and Aaron. So now it's just
Thanks,
Rachel and Aaron.
Thanks, Tara. Appreciate that. Yeah, so to answer that first question, yeah, quarterly is kind of exactly what I would like to see. Certainly, given that I envision there likely being some action, certainly would love to, when it's available, see that report that both the chief and Dan have been working on in their respective departments. I think that'll trigger a lot of conversation and perhaps some action. So I think until we get to that place where we've settled on actions and then have a plan, quarterly makes a lot of sense to me. In terms of what additional areas of concern we'd like to incorporate, I did mention that community education stuff. I think there's a lot of work that can be done there. I think that's pretty, for the most part. I mean, the sad part is we haven't even entered what is traditional the fire season. So it does seem like it's been a battle of attrition up to this point. But I do think that's one of those things that I think we could probably get going on sooner rather than later, just because of the positive impacts that it has as we do enter perhaps a worse part of the fire season as La Nina looks to set in and exacerbate current conditions. And then really around some policy things. I know Lauren brought up some policies among others. I'd be really curious about that. I want to say boundary because we're using that a bunch, but really that interface, we use that word a lot too. Really the connection between our regular building codes and that of the WUI building codes, and really trying to define those differences. And as we've said that, we might be expanding the where the WUI is, and then at some point it just becomes a citywide code. And so I kind of want to look at where those pieces fit in, because I think a larger citywide code might be necessary if we're looking to really encompass the whole community within the WUI. And so those are some things I'd like to sort of get up to snuff there. Also thinking about mandatory brush clearance. Having grown up in the Santa Monica Mountains, this was essential. I remember firefighters would literally triage a home and would just point to a home of saying, nope, can't save it. Yep, can save it. And they would literally just evaluate it in 10 seconds flat, largely based on surrounding brush clearance. And so I really think that there's an opportunity for us here. And I do remember the chief, maybe, and it might have been, I think he mentioned something that once that first home goes, the potential for other homes to burn exponentially goes up. And so I think looking at brush clearance is pretty important. And then also thinking about home sale requirements and documentation. I think they do this again in California. They require proof of mandatory fire or flood insurance upon sale. So I think that's one way, because at the end of the day, we're going to pay for this no matter what. And so making sure everyone's adequately insured, I think, is a great way to sort of help stave that off. And then also building in perhaps renter protections. Again, given more than half our community rents, they might not have the same luxuries of the information and knowledge that they have moved in or live in a wildfire zone or a flood zone. So I really think that not only should we think about their information, but also renter protections with regards to insurance from these national disasters as well. I'm also curious about easements for emergency access into and out of the WUI in various places, and whether or not that needs to be established. Do we have sufficient access? Might we need some more? And then let's see, where's the other one? And then lastly is really, I guess, a hope to think big as maybe some of these solutions, projects, and policies, infrastructure and assets may cost a lot of money. And I think, and I'd love to sort of hear some ideas that you don't really look at money as a barrier, because I think, everybody's starting to look at wildfire and climate resiliency from the state and the federals in new ways, and a lot of monies are coming available. So I'd really love to sort of see the grand thought on where all those pieces are, and that hopefully might help us prioritize things as we go forward. So that was kind of the big dive into some of those things that I'd love to see us incorporate into our resiliency work going forward. There's other small ones, but I think that's a good start. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. We have Rachel, then Aaron, then Lauren, and then we are trying to wrap it up to go on to our next subject. So let's see if we can do it. Go.
Nothing on the second point. To the first, yes, to the quarterly updates. Again, it's been my experience that like if council's adding time for council to hear things recurrently, like we did with COVID, where there wasn't even a code change anticipated, that just goes on our work plan. It creates accountability for the public. It creates a mechanism for the public to weigh in, at times. And it says we prioritize this above, other things in the city as part of what we care about. So it still doesn't make sense to me that we would not have flood, fire, and climate resiliency on our work plan after all that's happened in this year. So I would just add it to the work plan and ask colleagues to consider doing that. Doesn't sound like it's going to increase much staff work, but we are going to be getting quarterly updates, and that's kind of like, to me, what defines a work plan item. It's something council prioritizes. It's coming to us, and it's likely to lead to something that we vote on. So that's all I'm going to pitch. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, Aaron.
Yeah, yes to number one, and my guess is that that's going to be unanimous or close to it for council. I think we're going to want to hear more about this. I agree with Rachel's point. We may think it would be useful to elevate this into our list of council priorities officially, but clearly it is a priority for council. So I look forward to hearing about this more regularly. And on the second item, I'll just say people have already made some really great points. So appreciate all the council members who brought other points already up. And I'll just mention one. I know we've already talked about it a little bit, but the code revision that we've got coming up later this year, if we can look carefully at how we might push that a little further. Like, for example, Mike, you talked about the side shingles on the wood shingles on the side of a house isn't included currently. Well, maybe we should add that. That might be something to look at. So just to encourage us when we hit that code revision to look at making potentially some pretty aggressive changes to keep our houses and communities safe from future fires. That's all I got. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, we have Lauren and then Bob.
Thank you. So yes on number one. And in terms of, I don't know that these are all additional concerns, but sort of the big buckets, the volunteer, like looking at ways to increase volunteering and incorporate that energy, education, communication, mitigation, evacuation planning, building codes. And it's particularly with building codes, I'm interested in things that might be retroactive, because I think, not only do we have the issue of in the interface zones, houses that catch on fire are going to make it much more likely to stop the spread, but also, we have a lot of older multifamily homes that we've seen pose, a potentially fairly substantial risk to people in our community. And so making sure that we're looking at that as well.
Thank you, Lauren. That was excellent. Bob?
I want to thank the team for an excellent presentation, and I hope this is the first of many that we'll receive on a quarterly basis. However often you think we should receive these, I agree with my colleagues that regular reporting to the community on the good work you're doing is very helpful. I agree with everything that's been said by my colleagues, so I won't repeat it. I did want to highlight one thing that I did hear tonight that I thought was a really great idea. We hear a lot from our community when these disasters happen, and one, I think, criticism was probably repeated by several community members was confusion over of what was happening and where to go. Should I evacuate? Should I not evacuate? And if I do evacuate, where do I go? I think Chief Calderazzo made an outstanding suggestion that we follow the lead of California and some other places that have identified very specifically neighborhoods, whether it's neighborhood A, B, C, or however they're identified, and tell them where to go. Because we can't always control the message and it spins out of our control. But if we say evacuation for zone A, and those people should move to zone P or whatever it is, people will understand. People will remember what zone they're in and where they're meant to go. And that way, even if the message gets broadly broadcast beyond our control, we're being very clear about who's subject to evacuation, where they're meant to go. And I think that will help the fire department. I think that'll help the police department. And I think that's something I would like to implement as quickly as possible. Others have done this, and so we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. That was excellent. Okay, staff, did you get all your questions answered? Do you need anything more to go forward with the next steps?
I'll
Whoever
say
wants
yes.
to answer that.
We definitely did. Thank you very much for all that thoughtful feedback. And we'll definitely huddle together and talk about what we can do quickly and what might take a little longer.
Fantastic. Thank you again for everything. Okay, we're going on to our next subject. The draft of the 2022 Boulder Parks and Rec Master Plan. Nuria, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks so much. And again, thanks everybody for all those questions. We got what we needed and then some, as always. And so that's really great. And for this one, I'll keep it short and really pass it to Allie. But this is another topic that frankly has been worked on for years and exciting to have at this point of almost completion as we think about what's left. I'm really thankful for Allie and her entire team for all that they have done in getting us here and really teeing up a candid conversation that perhaps is overdue about the resources we need to make sure that we're moving forward and providing the parks and recreation services that community is asking for with, of course, what we have in terms of resources at our disposal. So I'll just let Allie sort of move us forward in that conversation, but I'll also say that to get us here, we had a lot of community engagement, and I'm always so thankful for community who lends their voice to the process. So Allie, I'll let you take it away from here. And thanks for being patient.
Yeah, that was a great discussion and we were listening carefully. So thank you, Nuria, for the introduction, and thank you, members of council, for having us here tonight. We are very much looking forward to an evening talking just about parks and recreation. I recently read that great leaders have bifocal vision, and I think great strategies do as well. They have the farsightedness that we need to plan and dream for the future, while also the ability to focus on the near term and the realities right in front of us. And we think this master plan does that. It outlines our community's hopes and dreams for its parks and recreation system. It's really exciting, y'all. It also acknowledges that with current funding, we have some choices to make, and we are eager for your input on our priorities and investments for the next 5 to 7 years. We have an incredible team working on this project. Not all of them are presenting tonight, but I want to appreciate folks from across our department and the organization who've contributed to this draft master plan. Among others, I want to specifically thank our colleagues in communications and engagement who've helped us ensure we get feedback from across the community. Presenting tonight are our interim planning manager and master plan project manager, Regina Elsner. We also have our senior city planner, Tina Briggs, who has been leading the engagement strategies for this project. Our lead consultants on our master plan are the award-winning firm Design Workshop, and our principal on the project has been recently named their CEO. We're so honored to have Becky Zimmerman here. And Eric Krongold is our project manager. He's also here to share information and support your discussion. Finally, I also want to note that our vice chair for the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, Chuck Brock, is here tonight. The PRAB has been engaged throughout this project, providing valuable input to inform the plan's progress and strategies. And while Chuck can't speak on behalf of the board, he certainly can answer general questions about the PRAB's involvement or discussions. So tonight, we have put this discussion into 2 parts. If you want to move, there you go. Thank you. So in the first, we're going to give an overview of the project's engagement and the blended approach for developing the plan. We're going to do that briefly because council has seen this project several times. And then we'll pause for the first chunk of your questions and discussion. And then we'll follow that with an overview of our plan alternatives and a discussion on prioritization. I'll note that this study session is scheduled for 2 hours. We are intending to be as brief as possible in our presentations. And if you choose to be more concise and short, we had our PRAB meeting last night and we would support that choice of yours. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our project manager, Regina Elsner. Regina's getting her microphone situated. There you go.
All right, I apologize. with all my screens up, technology got the better of me, so I apologize this evening. So just here, we have been working on this master plan update since approximately 2020. We had some initial delays due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout this process, we have followed the city's standard approach to master planning and the information that we've gathered, the deliverables as they've been presented, as well as our engagement with the community. The process that's outlined here on this slide was reviewed with council in December of 2020, and we refined that based on council's feedback to ensure that there was a focus on our engagement with the community. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board has been heavily involved throughout the process to provide their input and guidance on our process and outcomes. And we are now in the final phase of the project and eager to talk to council, the PRAB, and planning board over the next several months as we finalize the plan. During the first phase of the project, Research and Trends, the project team gathered general information and data about the Boulder Parks and Recreation System, as well as national and industry trends. This created the foundation of information for the rest of the process. The first window of engagement with the community focused on understanding their values and hopes as it relates to BPR and Parks and Recreation in Boulder. The project team hosted virtual stakeholder workshops to understand the unique perspective of our partners within the community. And we also kicked off a semester-long project with both Growing Up Boulder and the Youth Opportunities Advisory Board to hear the voices of the youth within our community. There was an intense focus during the needs assessment phase of the project in gathering data and zeroing in on the needs of the community. This was done through intense community engagement with a statistically valid survey that was accompanied by an open community survey, as well as polling activities on Be Heard Boulder. The timing of this phase was during some relaxed public health orders that allowed the project team to do some in-person outreach with low-income individuals, people experiencing homelessness, and other underrepresented communities, as well as hosting a public open house. At the end of this phase, City Council reviewed our information and provided us feedback again to guide to the next phase of our project. We have just wrapped up the implementation plan phase of our project, where the project team, along with input from staff, stakeholders, the community, the PRAB, have developed the policies, goals, and initiatives that are the foundation of BPR's work for the next 5 years. Just prior to another heightening of public health measures, the project team was able to host in-person workshops for staff and department stakeholders to develop the goals and initiatives based on the needs previously identified by the community. To engage with the larger community, the project team hosted a virtual open house with 2 options, an on-demand option with accompanying virtual exercises, as well as a staff-hosted virtual open house. And all of the materials for this engagement window were translated to Spanish, including the on-demand open house video. The project team also hosted BPR's first bilingual open house to hear directly from Spanish-speaking members of our community in their own words. This master plan update relies on the same 3-pronged approach to planning that the department's previous master plan successfully used. This approach blends input from research, policy, and the community to form the master plan recommendations. All these inputs are balanced and synthesized, considering the others. This input also includes coordination with other city departments to ensure that our work supports those larger citywide initiatives. And specifically, all of our master plan recommendations are considered through the lenses of equity and resilience to ensure that they are furthering these citywide priorities. Since 2014, BPR has focused our work around 6 key themes developed in collaboration with the community. The 2022 master plan continues to utilize these key themes to organize our work. The key themes are community health and wellness, keeping Boulder emotionally and physically healthy through its parks, facilities, and programs, taking care of what we have through prioritizing investments in our existing parks and facilities, and data-driven asset management. Financial sustainability, balancing the many needs with existing resources, focusing on core services and the priorities of the community. Building community and relationships, recognizing that communities are stronger when people are connected and neighborhoods are strong, and supporting social and cultural equity. Youth engagement and activity, prioritizing our youngest community members, and engaging youth with services that connect them with nature and opportunities to close the achievement gap. And finally, organizational readiness, focusing on our workforce, recognizing that we cannot achieve anything without a talented and engaged team. This also outlines developing the strong systems and enabling the department to adjust to evolving needs of the community. When we spoke with Council last July, we discussed how to ensure maintaining levels of service for parks and playgrounds with growing populations. This mapping shown here shows the accessibility to Boulder Parks and Recreation parks and playgrounds. Specifically, the lightest green shows areas within a half-mile walk to neighborhood parks larger than 5 acres, and the mid-colored green shows areas within approximately 1/4 of a mile walk to playgrounds. This analysis was focused primarily on the BPR system, but we recognize that this is only part of the story. There are Boulder Valley School District and open space properties that provide similar services and recreational opportunities, but are not included in this particular analysis. But this mapping does help the department as we start to identify gaps within the system where we need to look in more detail about where to focus our resources and our efforts. As I mentioned previously, we know that equity is an important issue that we wanted to start addressing through our plan. To that end, we worked with our consultant design workshop to begin to identify areas of need throughout the city. To identify those areas, we sought data that could be reliably analyzed across the city, but still protect the privacy of individuals. 2 index maps were developed, one for environmental need that identifies areas of lower tree canopy and higher average temperatures, and one for income need that incorporates data on affordable housing and city financial aid recipients. When combined, the resulting maps show these hotspots throughout the city where the need for services, including parks and recreation services, may be higher. This mapping, when combined with the previous mapping, again helps the department prioritize areas where investments and services can have the most impact. And at this point, I am going to hand the presentation over to Eric Krongold with Design Workshop to talk with you a little bit more about our financial.
Thank you, Regina. So while BPR has done a good job developing data-driven asset management program and prioritizing funding for capital maintenance and improvement, our analysis has shown that additional funds are needed in order to meet industry best practices for asset management. These investment recommendations are based upon the system's current replacement value, or CRV. Since 2016, the current replacement value of BPR's assets has increased due to the construction of new facilities, cost inflation within the construction industry, material cost increases, and a better overall understanding of assets within the department's portfolio. Using BPR's updated 2021 current replacement value and the current maintenance backlog of approximately $20.5 million, the department's current facility condition index rating is 0.07, which places BPR in the good to excellent range of the FCI scoring criteria. Now, it should be noted that this does not include the development of any new parks or facilities, such as replacing the South Boulder Rec Center. BPR's updated 2021 CRV numbers also enable the department to set new goals around asset management investment using the industry benchmark of 2 to 3% of current asset value for CIP and 4% for operations and maintenance. These asset targets are a best practice recommendation by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and are also the targets established in the city's facilities master plan. Using these recommended percentages, BPR will need to spend an additional $5.2 million per year to maintain its system in its current condition. Next slide, please. So switching over to the recreation side of the department, this graphic was created using responses collected during our statistically valid survey. It should be noted that while the community thinks it's essential or very important for BPR to serve almost every demographic of community member, those with disabilities, those with lower incomes, older adults, and youth were identified as priority populations. Next slide, please. With regards to how programs should be funded, responses collected through the statistically valid survey indicate the taxes should pay for a significant portion of programs for those with low incomes, those with disabilities, and those from underrepresented communities. And this is represented in the heavy dark green rows at the top of the graphic. Areas where fees could pay more are advanced level programming for adults and older adults and general adult activities. This is represented by the purple at the bottom end of the graphic. Generally, though, for a wide mix of programs, the community expressed an interest in an even mix of tax and user fee funding for services. And this is represented by that pink section that bisects the graphic. Next slide, please. So to frame some of the financial analysis, both ourselves and our subconsultant Ballard King assessed the fiscal performance of agencies across the country and here in Colorado. The analysis found that the BPR is a well-run agency. It's really one of the top in the country in terms of financial practices and using data and defined methodologies to inform decision-making. What this means for Boulder is that, number one, you have an agency to be proud of. Number two, though, is that there isn't a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of addressing the department's financial gap. So walking through this chart, with regards to staffing, you can see that BPR's FTE per capita is in line with the Colorado benchmarks. And locally, agencies have more staffing than those across the country. This reflects that parks and recreation agencies in Colorado are typically full-service departments with a higher level of service. While BPR's spending per FTE is in line with Colorado benchmarks, it is below national comparisons. For a typical agency, staffing costs make up about 54% of an operating budget, but for BPR, that number is 64%. As we noted, BPR's FTE per capita is in line with Colorado agencies, with the difference in expenditures reflecting BPR's higher minimum and living wages, as well as recent wage increases across the workforce. And the impact of all this is that the department has less funding available for non-personnel expenditures such as materials. With regards to funding, agencies typically derive about 60% of their operating expenditures from general fund tax support, while BPR only derives 19%. It should be noted, though, that BPR does have a diverse set of funding sources and does have a higher percentage of dedicated levies than other agencies. Also notable is that earned income is 24% for most agencies' funding, while BPR is 45%. Looking at the bottom of the table, BPR's tax expenditures per capita are significantly higher than national benchmarks, but less of a difference exists when compared with Colorado agencies. This is because BPR's system is largely built out, which reflects the community's longtime prioritization of parks and recreation. The result, though, is a system that is expensive to operate when you consider the department's commitment to paying a living wage, its environmental initiatives, and other factors. Looking forward, BPR's continued ability to generate additional dollars from earned income will be difficult, with fees for many services that are already perceived as high for the market and contributing to reduced participation from some segments of the community. Additionally, BPR already has a very high cost recovery rate compared to most other agencies. It is likely unrealistic to expect much of any increase in the current cost recovery rate in the future, due primarily to higher staffing and operations costs. If raising user fees is considered, it must be accompanied by a conversation around equity and who is disproportionately affected by these decisions. Fees can be raised, but so should funding for a sliding scale model of financial aid or other access initiatives. Next slide, please. So this graphic ties together the total financial picture for BPR. The column on the left represents BPR's current funding levels as determined by the 2016 to 2019 averages, with 2020 and 2021 being intentionally excluded because of variable levels of funding due to the pandemic. The column on the right is the recommended funding level to achieve asset management investment levels, recommended spending on urban forestry based on the Urban Forestry Strategic Plan, recommended investment per capita and per public tree, and investment required to address the recreation funding gap. As costs and wages continue to rise, BPR continues to fall behind on basic operations, maintenance, and capital repair and refurbishment. maintaining only the current funding level will require difficult conversations with the community about right sizing core services and expectations from the community.
All right, so we're at our first break where we can just take any general questions from council, and then we'll move into the questions that we have from staff.
Questions from council? Clarifying questions. Oh, looks like Mark.
Mr. Wallach, you're on mute.
Mark?
Had to happen. When you calculate CRV, are you looking only at the asset value of buildings, or are you including land values in there as well? For instance, the North Boulder soccer fields. It's a large expanse of land that has great value, and on it is a very small playground and restrooms. So how is that utilized in the calculation of CRV?
The CRV calculation is the cost of the built improvements on the land, but not the land itself. What it does exclude is the value of the urban canopy, our one asset that actually appreciates. And so that's excluded and modeled differently for how we should invest in it.
Okay, good. That clarifies it nicely. Thank you. That was my only question.
That's great. Okay, now we have Matt.
Thanks, Tara. And Mark, that was a great question. And just thanks for staff for such a great presentation on parks. And I really love that slide, that equity slide. I thought that was just primo, especially in a master planning process. My question is, we hear these backlogs from various departments, 100 million here, 50 million here, 20 million there. And that number is daunting, but it is usually only daunting in the context of what that backlog is compared to how much you're chipping away at it each year. And so I'm kind of curious, based on the resources that are currently available in the budget, how long would that take to work through that backlog?
Well, Jackson Hyde, our business services manager, is here, but I think the answer is that we won't, because it happened. I mean, just like driving a vehicle, you're continually accruing new backlog, right? And so with the current 4 to 6 million a year, we'll continue to decline in that facility condition index because we're not achieving the recommended investment. I see Jackson's here, so he can add to that.
Correct. We're currently contributing about 4.5 million a year to the CRV replacement. The ideal funding would be about 7.5 million a year at the 2.5%. So we do have a $3 million delta that we need to fund in order to get the full amount.
So we're going backwards. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like there's no other questions. Allie, do you want to continue?
I would love to continue.
Awesome.
So the first questions that we have for council, first is really, there's a lot of words here, so I'll just summarize. What we're asking is if that is council supports, while certainly we are going to explore measures to generate revenue, to garner revenue in other ways, we want to ask that council supports us exploring our service levels so that in some areas we might reduce them to fund continuation of others that are higher priorities.
So are you asking council to discuss this right now and what they think about this very first question? Is that what you want?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Anybody want to? Okay, we have Nicole.
I'll jump in. And Allie, I just wanted to thank you and your team. I think what you all have been doing, reading through the master plan, just really made it clear. You all are going way above and beyond with fewer resources than you need to try to address some of the needs that our community has and some of the desires right now. And it's incredibly inspiring and commendable. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your decision-making process and thinking about, how to balance some of these needs, desires of the communities with the realities of kind of staffing and funding.
Sure. We have two great models to inform decision-making, both for what we provide for recreation and how we invest in assets. And I think that probably Regina is the best to quickly summarize both of those.
Yeah, so as Allie mentioned, we have two different models that we utilize to prioritize our investments. So we have first is what we call our Recreation Priority Index. And what we do in that index is we look at our recreation programming and we identify through a series of questions and analysis who benefits from that programming. Is it a community benefit? Is it a recreational benefit? Or is it an individual benefit? And that really determines sort of the priority and the cost recovery rate for that particular program. And it sort of helps us dictate how much tax funding we provide to those programs and how much cost recovery we're looking at for those programs. Similarly, we have our asset management program where we look at two different scores as it relates to all of our assets within our system. We look at the condition of those assets. So are they in good condition, fair condition, poor condition? And we also look at the criticality or the consequence of failure. So how bad is it if that thing fails? And when we look at those two things, we come up with a prioritization to identify where we need to focus first as it relates to maintaining or repairing and refurbishing specific assets.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And the other question that I have is just around, and this may feel free to punt it to the next part of the discussion. But you showed the chart. The community doesn't really seem to want new taxes necessarily to pay for this. So what can you all do? What can we do to sort of help you get the resources you need and make sure that you have the capacity to continue maintaining our wonderful parks and recreation services with what exists?
Nicole, if you don't mind holding that, I do think that goes into the next part of the question with where we talk about just recreation fee setting and how we do that. So I think we'll get there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, then we have Bob.
If I understood the first question, Ali, it sounded like you were asking us whether you should engage in prioritization. Is that right? Between competing needs? Is that the essence of the question?
That is the essence of the question, Bob.
Well, of course, the answer is yes. That's what we do. Every department does that, and Boulder Parks and Rec, of course, has done that for as long as I've been around. I joined the Parks Board in 2009. Remember, we put together the last master plan in 2014. It was all about prioritization, right? And community appetites change over time. I remember back 10 or 12 years ago, it was all about handball, and now it's about pickleball. And people have desires to do different things. Some things are pretty persistent, like swimming, and other things kind of come and go. So obviously, you're going to have to do the best you can to prioritize, and recognizing that we can't be all things to all members of the community, given our limited resources. As Nicole said, that it sounds like there's probably not an appetite for increased taxes, and so you've got a pie that's only so big, and you'll have to prioritize that. How you do that is a tough one, because obviously there's, you could do a majority rule who uses the most stuff. But that then runs afoul of some of our equity principles. And so we have to be sensitive to the fact that some community members use different recreation facilities or different programs more than others. And I like the fact that over the last 10 or 15 years, the Parks Department has outsourced a number of its recreation programs, giving you the opportunity to really have the market determine what is of value and what isn't. So we've outsourced tennis, we've outsourced pottery lab, we've outsourced a few of the other recreation programs. And I think that's a good way, with scholarships to back it up, scholarships for those members of the community who can't afford necessarily the fees, but let some of these programs fly on their own. And if there is a sufficient demand in the community, then the market will support it. And if there's not, then there'll either be no takers from an outsourcing standpoint, or the business will falter. I mean, I think like everything else the city does, we do have to operate this as a business and recognize the fact that we are serving customers, our community members. And with some equity exceptions to that, we need to recognize that if we have a lot of community members who are demanding a particular service, that's a service we'll probably continue to provide. And if there's not many that are looking for a particular service, that's one that we either may stop providing or may outsource.
Thanks for Bob. I want to add just one thing, because I know it seems like a pretty obvious question. Do we prioritize? And just point out how much this community values parks and recreation. And so anything we stop doing can feel like a tanking. And so council support really is critical. And the out loud conversation here is really valuable for us. So thank you. The other thing I would add to what you just said, you said that, you know, it can depend on numbers, but it really is about the equity lens and who benefits and who's impacted by a service. And that helps both inform our service level, but how we pay for it.
Anything else, Bob? You done? Okay, he seems to be. Aaron?
Yeah, well, I'll just say yes. And I thought Bob and Nicole's comments were both very good. So just the one thing I'll add is, I mean, we know how important these services are to our community members. And as we see with the challenges in staffing the pools, right? And how anxious people are in getting those pool staff back up. So Allie, I appreciate everything that you and your team do to provide the utmost highest level of service with whatever funding and staffing levels you have available. Y'all are amazing. So let's leave it there.
Thank you, Aaron. Mark?
Yeah, I also want to thank Allie, and I want to say yes to the first question. Ingenuity is going to be very important in the coming years because we're not going to have the resources to fill every need. In the last few months, we've had conversations with fleet and facilities who wanted us to up our the percentage of current replacement value to the tune of several $1 million. We know we have a big open space maintenance backlog. We've had the arts community looking for a performance facility that would be very desirable in this community. And if we do not have a library district come November, we still have a library system that has its needs. And that's just a few of them. So I think we're in a position where, to the extent that you can be ingenious and practical, that's going to be required. I don't envy you that, you know, the prospect of saying we cannot perform a particular service going forward because the cries of anguish will be heard far and wide. But this is where we are. Our desires are insatiable and our finances are limited. And I support you in doing the best that you can, and I know you have and will, to provide as many services as possible to as many people, and you know, and deal with it as you can. And I'm very supportive of your efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Lauren?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. And you know, if we want to talk about implementing anything, it seems clear that, you know, we may have to talk about reducing something. So based on the wonderful work you guys have done in that master plan, I trust that you guys will be making smart decisions based on equity and in our community. And, you know, I think my only request would be if we are eliminating things, I think we do need to be really forward thinking in how we're communicating with the public about why and what benefit we're trying to create.
That's true, Lauren. And I'm going to just stick myself right in between you and Rachel to say, Allie, something that Lauren said is very, very true, is communicating with the public. I don't know if the public knows everything that is under the purview of the Parks and Rec Department. So I was wondering if you can either put a slide up or just name them. So this very long list that Parks and Rec is in charge of, so the public can see how difficult it is to figure out where to put the monies. And of course, I was on the Parks and Rec board, and that's when I first heard the phrase taking care of what we have, which is a perfect phrase for how we can't let the maintenance part of everything deteriorate. So Allie, you want to do that for me?
I will take the opportunity to celebrate our system. Sure. So we don't have a slide prepared, right? But what the community should know is that Parks and Recreation operates a system that the community's been investing in for over 100 years. We have 1,800 acres of urban parkland. We have 3 recreation centers, a Flatirons Golf Course, Valmont City Park and Bike Park, the Boulder Reservoir. We operate the Pearl Street Mall, the heart of Boulder. We operate Columbia Cemetery, where some of our most famous and infamous community members are buried. We operate the lawn at Chautauqua. We have 12 historic and cultural assets that are some of our best living history that you'll learn about in the coming month. I'm going to forget. We care for over 50,000 of the city's public trees and provide a lot of advice to help the community care for even more private trees. We have natural lands. We care for incredible vegetation and species on the north shore of the Boulder Reservoir.
How many parks?
We have over 100 sites. Some of them are as small as the little postage stamp park you might walk through on your way down to our 3 biggest, which are our community parks on east, north, and south parts of town in the Boulder Reservoir.
Thanks, Allie, for doing that. I appreciate it. Okay, Rachel.
Hi, Allie Rhodes. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. You asked us to sort of as I understood it, chime in and give you cover for the hard decisions that are going to have to be made. So I'm here to give cover and say I support you. I have your back on, and any community discontent really should come my way and my colleagues' way. We are giving this direction, and Allie's doing what we will be giving direction on. So thank you for making those hard decisions. That's not easy given how much you love, to the point of tears, parks and recreation, right? So I don't envy you. And I just want to, I might say it more than once tonight. If you are a teenager watching this, or you are a parent of a teenager, and you want to swim this summer, we need lifeguards. So maybe you could have a slide with the lifeguard application later, Allie, but we also need our community to show up sometimes. And so sometimes it's not a matter of money. We need people to work some of these jobs. So please lifeguard for us.
I'm going to jump in there. I know council is supposed to be discussing. It is not just high school students. Lifeguarding is such a fun job. You meet community, you connect with people. There are a lot of people for whom lifeguarding could be a really fun opportunity. I also feel the need to comment. One of the ways that I know the hardship of the last 2 shows up for me is I am more emotional than I have ever been in my life. And it shows up most when I am talking about our incredible team. Several of you have commented on already, and I'll just try and keep it together. When you look at our team and what they have been through in the past 2 years.
Thanks for sticking with us. Yeah, I've watched. It's been a lot.
Anything else, Rachel? Thank you so much. Matt.
Thanks, Tara. You're passing that on there, Allie. Boulder's been known as being one of the fittest communities, in the U.S., if not on the planet, for quite a long time. And it's no mistake that we also commensurately have been traditionally investing in our parks the same amount. And I rhetorically ask, is it a coincidence? And so I think, as it stands, not in the way that it could be nefariously used, but in many ways, this is a pay to play. And I think our community needs to pay to play to stay that healthy and maintain that investment in ourselves. It's not just the parks, it's a reinvestment in our own health. So to really answer the question, yes, we have to be creative. And I really love the entrepreneurialism that Parks and Rec is looking to do. Not to dig up an old issue, but this was exactly part of the plan with Driftwind and the amazing events at Boulder Res that were going to be planned for that, was to build that community and build that support. So I hope to see that we can do this at Flatirons Golf Course, and I hope that we can really build that entrepreneurialism. I think it's unfortunate that we have to be entrepreneurial in this form to this extent to just cover our bases when we're moving backwards with regards to supporting our basic infrastructure. I think, and I hope that our community can do more, and I hope that we can make the investment, not just in ourselves, but in our future generations for their health, be it mental and physical, and for the health of our community. So I know those are large statements, but they really feed to the values of our community. And I hope that those listening in our community can match that investment with what our aspirations are for ourselves and future generations. So I hope we can do that. So yeah, I appreciate the entrepreneurialism and being very clever in these hard times. And I hope that we can acquire the resources in order to make our parks the thriving entity and assets that they are and should be in our community.
That was great, Matt. And I agree with you. Nicole, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, sorry, I realized I forgot to actually answer the question. I just asked a question earlier, but yes, Ellie, I do support in the answer to that, to number one there. And what I would ask as well for you, Ellie, as well as all my colleagues here on council is help sort of holding each other accountable to cases where, we are really wanting to expand in some way, right? Versus taking the strategy of taking care of what we have, just, letting us know, or Nuria or somebody letting us know when we're at risk of kind of adding things rather than, supporting these decisions of cutting back in some places so that we can maintain and move forward with what we have. For, example, as we're thinking about like the West End closure downtown and those kinds of things, if there are places where it's going to add work, take away from some of these other things that you're involved in. I would just really love to know that, right? And have a bit of that accountability there, and just somebody putting up that flag saying, hey, slow down, watch out. This is something that could take us over a little bit, but thank you. And just to echo Rachel's comment, but it's not just about lifeguards. You have all kinds of positions within Parks and Rec that are open that need people. I think if everybody can go out and try to recruit one or two teenagers or others in the community who may be looking to kind of give back, that's a really helpful way that we can all band together to support our wonderful parks.
Thank you, Nicole. That was great. Allie, do you want to go on with your next series of questions? Or?
I would be happy to. So these are really about, so council doesn't necessarily see the fee setting policy for parks and recreation. So this is our chance, and I'll take Rachel's cue. We want to make sure you support the way we charge fees as we move forward, right? Because just as certainly there's community benefit programs that we think merit tax funding, there are programs where the user should pay. Since 2014, we have carefully and methodically been addressing fees and charging them appropriately. And we want to make sure that council supports us continuing to charge adults who have the ability to pay full cost or cost plus for their services. So I'll just stop there, and you can give thumbs ups or maybe raise a hand if you have a question.
Can you explain what cost plus means in this regard?
Sure. So we know the last robust, I'll give an example. The last robust analysis we did on cost of visitation to the recreation center says it costs us about $10 a visit. And so we've been carefully increasing the cost of the adult drop-in to get closer to that. We're not there yet. We're at $9. We're talking with the PRAB right now about what drop-in fees for should be adults. All of our other fees are a discount off of that, but our intent is that the adult drop-in fee pays full cost for visitation, and similar with our registered program. So if you register for a Pilates class, you're going to pay per class for the cost of that class. Looks like
sorry.
Nicole.
So what's cost plus about it then? It's the cost.
If sometimes the market is higher than cost, and so I'll make it up. Let's say that the cost for the visit is $10, and the market for a drop-in visit to a recreation facility is $15. Then let's charge $15, and maybe we have a chance to generate some intra-fund subsidy for adults with an ability to pay. I want to be clear. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, so we have some hands now. Nicole, then Rachel, then Junie.
I just have a question. Are these mutually exclusive? Are we choosing just one to give a thumbs up to, or any of these that we're on board with give a thumbs up? Okay,
it's comprehensive. They build upon each other.
My question is is this for older adults too who get discounts right now?
That's next. This is just, so we classify as adult as someone 18 to 59.
I'll hold my question for that then. Thanks.
Okay, Junie.
Thanks, Tara. I just wonder, what does it mean an adult who can pay or an adult who can fully pay?
It means someone who doesn't qualify for our current financial aid programs. So we have a financial aid program. Anyone who qualifies gets actually 100% free access to the recreation centers. That's funded in part by the general fund transfer to the recreation activity fund, as well as the grants we receive from the health equity fund.
Okay.
Any other questions, Junie?
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question, Ally. I'm thinking about the people that are missing out by, let's say, a few dollars on getting, you know, on what's the word I want to use? I'm getting
support.
weird. Yes, thank you, thank you. Getting support, and I remember Eric talking about a sliding scale model of financial aid, which I've always been interested in. And tell us, is that going to be possible? Because I'm concerned about, let's say, a family of 4 or 5 or 6 that is barely making it, but can't really apply for financial aid. So that's my question. I'm also going to ask you to talk about the Louisville Rec Center and how much do they, we get a lot of people writing to us, why don't you, I'm going to the Louisville Rec Center, it's too expensive here. So explain to us how those models are the same or different and why Louisville is able to charge.
Sure. First, I think your sliding scale question I'll give to Eric with Design Workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ally. So as part of the next steps for this master plan, and this has been identified for some goals and initiatives, investigating the implementation of a sliding scale financial aid model is certainly something the department is interested in. To your point, there are cases that we've heard of where families may not qualify, but may have a significant, may have a number of children, and the financial burden of trying to participate in certain recreation programs is too much for them. So investigating this sliding scale model where they may qualify for a certain percentage of aid is certainly something the department is looking to pursue.
And then as far as Louisville and how they are funded, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know that when that community passed the bond to renovate their existing recreation center, they simultaneously passed an ongoing tax dedicated to supporting the operations of it so that they were able to provide subsidy to across many different age groups and programs. So they're just funded differently.
So of course I want more money to go to Parks and Rec, you know I do. So I'm going to suggest at whatever point, since I'm new on council, I'm able to, is how can we get more money to Parks and Rec since they have so much that they're responsible for. I think the community, I think combined with inflation and construction costs and supply chain issues and labor shortages, that I hope the community understands the kind of pressure that Ally is under trying to please everybody and her entire department. Thank you to the rest of the department. And hi, Chuck, by the way. And so I'm going to be also wondering if there are some creative ways to increase that budget, but this is not the time for that. So I will move on. Let's see. We don't have any questions. Do you have any comments about that, Ally?
No, I just wanted to add that it is in the master plan to explore a sliding scale model and to develop costing for that. And then council would see that in a future budget proposal. It is not funded to actually implement such a program, right? That would require additional funding. I don't see any other questions. So the next part of this question is about that community benefit programming. And if you think back to the slideshow, we talked about who the community thinks it is most important that we serve and how we use our taxes. That's what this question is about. So we just want to make sure it's clear to both council and the community that those services are going to continue to be very constrained without additional funding. The enhancements might be possible with alternate and one-time funding. One thing council will see in the 2023 budget that you can discuss holistically with the other city proposals is a position for us to have a partnerships and philanthropy manager. We've been successful with that in the past. The pandemic slowed it down a little bit, but it's something we'd like to build. Going to Rachel's question about age-based discounts. So the community has expressed support for subsidies for youth and older adult programs. We currently offer seniors a 25% discount off of that adult base rate. There are not senior discounts for registered programs. And we also offer a youth discount of 40% off of that base rate. And then youth programs, the pricing varies based upon the market and our role in the program. So really what we're saying here, and I appreciate Rachel's candor, is we just want to make sure that folks know we're not going to be able to do more for these priority populations without additional funding. And to Tara's comment, where this would show up next is as we develop the budget, you would see proposals from us where we might be able to continue to enhance these priority programs that council would then have to explore holistically. Also, as a next step, we didn't get a chance to necessarily talk through our funding and the strategies with the Financial Strategy Committee of Council, and that is something that we would love to continue, or love to begin, I guess.
Thank you, Allie. Rachel.
Since I'm being candid tonight, Allie, and I hope none of it's offensive, this part probably will be, not to you, but to the whole community. When I look at my family, I've got a daughter who's a new nurse, and she would need the subsidy in her young 20s more than my mom, who's a retired nurse. And so the age-based with no, qualifying income threshold is a little bit strange to me, given how hard it is to afford Boulder at the current prices to buy in, and how much the millennials and the generation below them, but that also wouldn't get discounts, are struggling here. So I have a little problem if there's an adult who doesn't need a discount, you just automatically get 25, and then there's a 27-year-old who needs it more doesn't get one. So I'm just putting that out there. That's a little strange result to me.
I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to say that I agree with Rachel, and I'm wondering, Allie, if we could take that discount down. Now, don't forget those that are qualifying, for those that are 60 plus, that there are opportunities like silver sneakers. It's not like we're saying to people who can't afford it, to seniors who can't afford it, you have to pay more. But for those that can, I would like to see that discount go down to 20% or maybe even 15%. Just throwing that out there. And I'm wondering, what does the rest of council think? What do you think, Allie? What does your team think about lowering the discount for the seniors when it's applicable?
Before council discusses, I do think some data would help, because it's something our team's been analyzing. And so Jackson Height is our business services manager, and I see him popping on camera to share some information with you about senior participation and how fees are paid.
Sure. So 91% of all visitation to the recreation centers are by Silver Sneakers, Renew Active, and our third-party memberships. The additional 2% are eligible for financial aid and are accessing via financial aid. And then the last 7% are actually paying the full senior rate. So we do have a very small percentage of overall users that are paying the senior rate and getting subsidized in that way.
So just long story short, adjusting the senior discount wouldn't necessarily have a lot of bang for our buck. What we've heard from those third-party providers is that the rate we charge is about the top of what they're willing to pay. So certainly we'll continue to lean into those negotiations and relationships. That's where we probably have some leverage, but it's not really in the senior the drop-in fee for seniors.
Anybody else want to reply? So what you're saying is you need to increase the regular adult fee. Is that what you're saying?
We're saying that the adult drop-in fee will increase, and then all of the fees will cascade off of that. The senior fees, youth fees, and then we have multi-visit discounted passes. So you can get a monthly pass or an annual pass. They're all based off of that adult drop-in fee.
Well, it looks like there's no more questions. You want to continue? Oh, wait, Lauren. I see Lauren.
I'm sorry. I just one quick one. You mentioned that currently, like at the rec centers, the day use fee isn't a full cost recovery. Do you have a sort of timeline for implementation, or would, if we say, yes, we can go forward with a higher cost recovery, does that spike things right away, or what is, how do you plan that?
Yeah, I'll let Jackson take that question.
Sure. So we've been going through an exercise with the PRAB starting in March of this year, looking at what it costs to operate each of the recreation centers and what full cost recovery would be. So as we're developing our 2023 operating budget, we are proposing a modest fee increase to get closer to cost recovery. And our historic practice has been to update the fee structure every 2 years. so that there's a gradual increase over time. So 2023 would be the beginning of a new fee increase to get closer to the full cost recovery.
Thank you.
Junie.
Yeah, Ali, I just have a question because I think part of your comments or statements are slightly confusing to me. You mentioned the drop-in fees, and you said, well, if someone can pay the full drop-in fee, they're likely to pay that. But I'm wondering if someone is dropping in, which I have done before because somehow my gym pass expired and I just want to exercise somewhere. I just don't understand how would you incorporate someone who's just dropping in into a process where you somehow have some eligibility criteria for them to get a discount.
Yeah. So the way that our financial aid program works is that if you qualify for support for any way that you access our system. The way that we qualify we've tried to make it easier and easier over the years. So for example, if someone is a resident in low income housing in Boulder, they automatically qualify. They don't have to fill out any of our paperwork. They get a voucher. We enter them into our system and it notes in their account that they've qualified. And so if they walk in and they just want to pay the drop in, or they just want to drop in for the day, they give their name, they're in for free. If they want to get an annual pass and swipe a card, then great, there's a card to swipe every visit. But however they choose to access our system, it's set up.
Thank you for that.
All right, that looks like we can go on then. Go ahead, next question.
All right, so the last one in this, looking for council support. We talked to you last summer about how we might support achieving our own goals through revenue generation. And we just wanted to confirm council support for opportunities to do that, such as, but not limited to, increasing our non-resident fee, opportunities for social entrepreneurship. Matt mentioned the work we're doing to really build great public-private partnerships, specifically in our regional parks, but there are other opportunities for sure. And then also commercial use in our parks is an opportunity. So I'll pause there and look for your input on that specific item to generate. This goes to Nicole's question earlier, right? Like how can we there's no magic money tree that council has. We know that. We're eager to capture opportunities where we can to support these community benefit programs.
So did you want us to weigh in on A, B, and C, or?
I think we've heard your input on A and B, unless folks have missed it. I'm now specifically asking about C.
Okay. We have Rachel and then we have Aaron.
I will be brief. I support, and I assume you will, here's Elmer, be creative with this. So yeah, I support, that's all.
Aaron.
Yeah, I agree, and you all are very creative, and I look forward to seeing your creative ideas. And my guess is that council probably supports this. This is it's a good step forward.
Mark.
I am also supportive, although I would, ask you to be careful about how you commercialize our parks. I mean, I wouldn't like to see a Taco Bell in the North Boulder soccer fields. I just don't know that would be an appropriate way of generating revenue. But with that caveat, yes, I am supportive of your exercising as much ingenuity as you can.
Junie.
I agree. I'm fully in support as well. But I just have a quick question. You mentioned people who live outside. Is it outside of Boulder City? Is it Boulder County? How far outside are we talking about?
Yeah. Our current definition of a resident is anyone who lives or works in the city of Boulder. The worker part of the definition was added in the 2000s as a way to promote economic vitality and during the recession. And so currently, if you live or work in the city of Boulder, you benefit from the resident rate. And so something that we're exploring with the PRAB and specifically at our regional draw facilities like the Boulder Reservoir and even the Scott Carpenter Pool has been an attraction. Could we really look at some healthy increases for those facilities that we know people are willing to pay? We saw during the pandemic when there weren't a lot of opportunities. So historically, the non-resident fee is a 25% surcharge over the resident fee. In the pandemic, to visit the pools, it was a 50% surcharge, and we didn't see any change in the split in visitation. It's about 75-25 at most facilities, 75% residents and 25% non. So, Junie, that probably was more than you were asking, but hopefully I got there.
No, that's fine. Thank you for that. So does that mean if you live in the unincorporated areas, you're not included?
You do not benefit from resident rates at our facilities. The justification for that is that, I mean, obviously sales tax can come from anyone who comes into the city, but our facilities really are in many ways built and maintained by property taxes and people who live in the community and are benefiting from the full set of services and the full set of city property taxes.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that. And yeah, I'm fully in support. Thank you.
Thanks, Junie. And Matt.
Yeah, I fully support the direction that we're looking to go. You know, one added thing with regards to sort of that entrepreneurial part, and added thing is thinking about, I know Mark doesn't want Taco Bells, but we do have a successful event called Taco Fest that's happened in numerous years in North Boulder Park. So, you know, I do think thinking about events in that capacity is a way in which, instead of waiting for them to come to us, maybe we try to go to some events to try to create those spaces for community engagement and leveraging our parks for revenue generation in that capacity. So yeah, it's no Taco Bell, but it might be a one-day Taco Fest or something like that. Anyway, I think Mark got his thumbs up, so he can do a one-day Taco Fest, I think, pretty well. I think the rest of us could. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to see us hopefully leverage and maybe lower the barrier of entry for some of those things so that we can get them off the ground and running.
Rachel, do you have your hand up? You want to say something else?
I just want to ask a clarifying question about the Taco Bell scenario. As I recall, about a year ago, we did some ordinance, revisions that would you couldn't put a restaurant anywhere other than a couple of finite spots, and it wasn't going to be a Taco Bell. So before we read a headline tomorrow about Taco Bells at soccer fields, can we get a little clarification on that?
I would love to clarify, and I'm biting my tongue from commenting on the Taco Bell specific scenario.
And I'm not bombing on Taco Bell, like who among us hasn't, but just yeah, thank you.
Here's what I'd like to remind council. One is that yes, while restaurants are allowed by right in our 3 regional parks, council has purview over any lease of parkland that exceeds 3 years. Any lease that exceeds 1 year, between 1 and 3, has the approval of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. It is my experience that investment in a restaurant is a long-term game, and someone's not going to do a 1-year lease. And so I would predict that any restaurant lease or any long-term partnership, council is going to see the agreement, because it's going to be, an agreement involving real property interest that's longer than 3 years. So you'll get the chance to weigh in.
And it was only at the reservoir, at the golf course, maybe, and
Valmont City.
It can't go at the soccer field. So just that's out. Thank you.
I mean, Taco Fest is a whole other story. One thing I'll just note on that is the city has hired, for the first time, we're creating an office of special events in our community vitality department. Our events manager is Parks and Recreation's own Justin Greenstein. We know he's going to do great work there. And one of his goals is, one of the goals for the work is to keep building on the city special events review team citywide has been building great practices. And one of the goals is to look at how could we look at events as more of a cost recovery effort. So we're with you.
Well, I'm going to weigh in for a second that I 100% agree with this and stand by you, and hope that I think this is a great way to pay for our backlog of maintenance and for cost recovery. So I stand with you, Allie. I think it's a great idea. I'm very excited about the golf course and the new restaurant that's going to be there as well. Do you have all your questions answered? It looks like everybody is standing with you here. Did I not give you everything you need, Nuria? Did I do everything I need to do on this so far?
Let me check with our project team, and just Regina, if you want to chime in, if you think you heard anything or have any specific questions you'd like us to double click on.
I think I've heard everything that I needed. Eric, Becky?
Heard everything I need to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good discussion. Thank you.
Anything else, Allie, you have to say? You have more slides?
We do. So next we're going to fly through our plan alternatives and then ask you another set of questions. Really, well, I'll stop. Regina's going to explain this to you.
Yeah, so we are going to quickly go through our plan alternatives. So this is really thinking about the different fiscal scenarios. So based upon the city's financial planning scenarios and building upon the information that we have about BPR system, the master plan includes 3 scenarios for the 3 service areas of our department: our parks, our facilities, and our programs. The vision scenario that's presented in these tables represents the full set of services that the community would like to see and are outlined in various plans and studies that we've conducted over the years. But as we've just been discussing, funding is not available to realize that vision plan. And so we want to be clear about how we would invest in our system based upon this master plan. The fiscally constrained scenario is really our promise to the community about where we will focus our limited resources for the next 5 years. And for our parks in particular, we'll be focusing on operations and maintenance, as well as our capital investments, and on ensuring that our existing amenities are maintained well. We will prioritize projects that reduce our maintenance backlog and improve operational efficiencies that either maintain or reduce the burdens on our operations and maintenance. Additional infusions of funding will prioritize adding amenities in areas that are currently underserved or implementing projects that improve the resilience of existing resources, such as increasing our rotational pruning and planting of new trees that support the urban tree canopy and the other benefits that trees provide to our community. And again, within our existing funding levels for our facilities, we will focus on the continued operation and maintenance of our facilities to ensure that they continue to be a resource for the community. Current CIP plans include projects to maintain well both the East Boulder Community Center and the North Boulder Recreation Center. South Boulder Recreation Center is quickly approaching the end of its useful life and is at the point where repairs will make less and less sense given the building's age and facility condition index. The existing South Boulder Recreation Center also does not meet the city goals of welcoming all members of our community, given the challenges related to the accessibility of this aging structure. Replacing this building is not funded in the fiscally constrained scenario, and something we anticipate exploring through citywide budgeting and funding opportunities. Additional funding for our facilities could provide for improvements at existing facilities to recognize the ever-changing needs of our community. To Council's previous points about needing to have spaces that are flexible and meet the current needs of the community. Or also making improvements to the resilience of existing amenities. That can include things like replacing our courts with post-tension concrete that stands up to increased usage and has a longer lifespan, or converting some of our natural grass fields to artificial turf that provides more playability with less maintenance. And for our recreation services, within the fiscally constrained scenario, fees will continue to increase across the board to keep up with expenses, and financial aid will be dependent upon grants and philanthropy. Services for our priority populations will also be dependent upon grants and philanthropy, as the general fund subsidy is stretched to support age-based discounts and the current level of financial aid. So I walked through those alternatives quickly, and we have 2 questions. The first one, does council have any input on our plan alternatives as they've been presented here and support the initiatives of the fiscally constrained scenario?
I see Bob's hand up.
I am fine with the plan having a fiscally constrained set of descriptions, and also with it having the second tier of action. I think a good example of an action alternative is what you just mentioned as far as the South Boulder Rec Center, where we're going to have to try to find funding to develop and replace that as it reaches the end of its economic useful life. But I'd like to make a really, really strong pitch, and I'm going to say this on every master plan as long as I'm on council, for getting rid of the vision category. It just gets us into trouble. We put it in every master plan. The chapter starts, if money was no object, ... here's what we would do. And money's always an object. I don't know why we have vision plans. They only get us into trouble because what people do is they skip over the chapter 1, fiscally constrained, and skip over chapter 2 on action. They go right to the vision and they say, it says right here on page 47 that we're going to do these things. And we can't do these things. We never can do these things. And we have a really big problem right now with the library because people are pointing to the vision plan for the library and saying, why aren't we doing these things? We need to go out and create a library district. What I don't want to do is adopt this master plan this year, and then 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, have a group of residents come to us and say, we need to create a parks district because we're not doing the vision plan. So let's stop doing the vision plan because we'll never, ever do the vision plan. Take it out, keep in the other 2 chapters, and let's focus on what we can do to fund action.
Okay, looks like Aaron's next.
Yes, so I do support you moving forward, starting with that fiscally constrained start, and then with this idea of maybe having some targeted possibilities for implementing action items, that subject to, the department's thoughts and discretion, but run past your analysis. I'll just say I was really impressed by the mapping exercise that was done of the investment need prioritization that overlaid the environmental needs with the income-based needs. I thought that was really powerful and compelling. And so and I'm really glad to see equity-based mapping like that allow us to make more data-driven decisions about where we need to make investments. So maybe if you can use that in similar analyses to think about where our targeted opportunities are to make some additional investments, I think that would be fantastic. I'll just mention tree canopy as one of those things. You talk about how it's our one appreciating asset, and it is investments in our urban tree canopy are a long-term investment in our city's kind of resilient and climate sensitive future. So, and it's also one of those areas where can benefit lower income communities who often don't have as good of a tree cover. So that's an area that I think is definitely worth looking at in particular. But I think you all are absolutely on the right track, and taking care of what we have needs to be the priority, and a limited amount of additional initiatives makes sense. So keep at the magnificent work. Super appreciative of everything you've done. Also of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. I know Chuck Brock is here tonight. We haven't heard from him, but Chuck, appreciate your efforts. Really appreciate everybody else on PRAB's efforts. And I know you'll steward this master plan to a successful conclusion and the implementation of it as well. And there, Chuck popped up. Hi, Chuck. Thanks for being here. That's all I got.
Chuck is a huge visionary. Just a shout out to Chuck. Okay, we have Nicole next.
I just had a clarifying question first. And you talked about the potential kind of alternative methods of getting some additional funding for Parks and Rec. Is that to sort of meet that fiscally constrained option? Does my question make sense? So like we talked about some other, and I know you've been thinking about other ways to generate revenue. Is that just to meet the fiscally constrained, or is that for some of the other ones?
Regina, do you want to take a crack at this?
Sure, I'll start. So primarily those revenue generating in the conversations that we just had with council initially is to really get us to that recommended funding level for fiscally constrained so that we can fully realize the asset management, the operations and maintenance to maintain the system in the way that it is right now, and kind of make some necessary improvements. As far as being able to take additional steps into that action sort of level, that would require additional funding, things like the CCRS tax, grants, specific donations, things like that can actually bump us up into that action level of funding.
I think there's a really good example of that at the Scott Carpenter Pool, where we built a capital stack to achieve community needs that aligned with the various funding sources. So the replacement of the aging lap pool and the bathhouse was funded with Parks and Recreation capital dollars. The expansion of the lap pool was built with impact fee money that is dedicated to Parks and Recreation development. The whole new family fund was funded in the last round of the community culture and safety tax. So what we try to do is dedicate Parks and Recreation money, city money, to taking care of what we have. And then if in a project there's a way to do a little bit plus, it's with other sources of funding, so that the base funding is always going to base needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ally.
Yeah,
We
helpful.
have Lauren. Wait, oh, Nicole, did you have
I
more?
wasn't quite done.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to
Oopsie.
now
My bad.
I wanted to now answer your question for us. And yes, I mean, I do support the sort of fiscally constrained and the steps to try to get us there, and the general philosophy of taking care of what we have. And, I think what's a little, the library district was mentioned, what's a little bit different here is that, you're not putting into the master plan saying that we're going to have a Parks and Rec district. So I think, just keeping the master plan to the things that we can achieve is really good. And I think that was the difference with the library's master plan, is that the library district was actually in the master plan as something that we were going to try to achieve. And so I really want to be very vocal and clarify that in our giving you this guidance that, we want this take care of what we have philosophy, we're really holding ourselves, this current council, as well as future councils, to supporting what's going to be in there and to supporting that philosophy. And so I think that's just important for us to carry forward in our decision making, that being the council that's working on this master plan that will, approve it, we're really holding ourselves and future councils to what's in here.
Well said. We have Lauren.
Thank you. So I kind of wanted to touch on a point that Aaron brought up about the urban tree canopy. Just reading through the fiscally conservative option, it mentions philanthropy and partnership as, some of the ways that we'll be funding this. And I just wanted to know if we have a way to, because one of my concerns is that when we look at the city as a whole, it's typically underrepresented, neighborhoods that are lower income and things like that, that don't have the same kind of urban tree canopy as the rest of the city. And so through those mechanisms, would we still be able to focus on improving our urban tree canopy specifically in those areas?
What I think I hear you asking, Lauren, is if we base building canopy growth on philanthropy and partnerships, is it pay to play or pay to grow? Or how do you make sure that those decisions are also equity based? And I know Regina and the team are having wonderful conversations, doing a lot of really great work, and she can answer that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so especially as it relates to the work that our Parks and Recreation Department does related to our tree canopy, our forestry team is already starting to think about how they can operationalize that equity mapping that I touched on briefly, and looking at especially the environmental need index about where do we have low tree canopy, where do we have public spaces that can handle additional tree plantings, things that are irrigated, where there is space for those trees to grow and really mature and thrive. And then also thinking about if there aren't areas for public tree plantings within those kind of darkest areas of need, are there ways that we can work with other departments, whether it's transportation or planning and development services, to really build partnerships through like the Cool Boulder initiative and others that support planting in those areas. So it's really trying to look holistically across that canopy and how we can work to improve that canopy.
Thank you. And then I guess, so in general, I support this. I think, and the only areas that I have any concern over are sort of, the tree canopy, because like we said, that's something that's value increases over time. And also, trying to look for opportunities like, youth volunteering, especially if those opportunities can provide, like free labor. Seems like, I get that, there's a management aspect to that and all of that, but if there is any way that that can be close to cost recovery, or help with anything else, I would love to see that looked at.
Thanks, Lauren. I want to insert myself right here before Matt. Sorry, but that's a good thing about leading a meeting. You can do that. So I just want to say a community member, Allie and Regina, had a really good thought. And it was about the East Boulder community sub-community plan. And he talked about putting parklets in versus just one giant Valmont park. And when I was driving around with the folks from the city around East Boulder, there was a real lack of parklets, trees, everything. So I really like that idea for the reason that, walking to a park is super important to me. And I know to a lot of people. So I don't know if the master plan is a place for something like this, and he thought it was, but I wanted to, since we were talking about heat islands and tree canopies, Lauren was, I just wanted to put in a little 2 cents that would be an awesome thing, because I am concerned about East Boulder being a heat island.
I'm going to let Regina talk specifically about park development and as it relates to the East Boulder sub-community plan, because Parks and Recreation was involved and consulted on that project. But I want to respond to the comment about Valmont City Park to remind the community and council. Parks and Recreation owns 100 or so acres on the south side of Valmont, across from the developed bike park and east of what is currently just a playing field. There's a concept plan for that park that includes the development of several multi-use fields, a soft surface running track, and many other facilities that we do need in the community. And so we would not advocate for breaking that park up. We think its amenities are going to be required, especially if, one of our hopes is at Mapleton. If you can picture that park, there are currently 3 ball fields with an incredible amount of density happening around it just to the east at Boulder Junction. So our plan is to redesign that park to 2 inward facing fields, but it's really could be a park most of the time to serve that population growing there, which means taking away a field that we hope to build at Valmont. So
no, did you think I wanted to take away the park? No, I didn't want to make Valmont smaller. I wanted to add parklets to East Boulder.
I heard you say not develop the big park, and I got very nervous. So,
now, you know me, I'm sometimes
Regina, could you talk to the East Boulder sub-community plan and just the comments about parks and how important they'll be in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. And so with the recommendations within the East Boulder sub-community plan, there is definitely an increase in residential development potentially in the East Boulder sub-community area. And we recognize that currently within that sub-community, there are no neighborhood parks. And so that is part of why within the plan alternatives that we've identified in this master plan is to develop the, at least the community benefit amenities within Valmont City Park. So those are things like playgrounds and the multi-use fields that really are more similar to the amenities that you would find in a neighborhood park, to be able to provide services for the increased residential development that is suggested or planned for really the park flanks, so that those eastern and western edges of Valmont City Park, and really being able to provide some park services to those communities. As far as the idea of additional parklets, we all know that the value of land in Boulder is extremely high, and so acquiring new park property was not highly favored by a lot of our community within our statistically valid survey. So that would acquiring additional land for those types of park amenities would be a challenge. If we were thinking about I think the sub-community plan also calls out for public paseos and public park-like spaces. And I think that is definitely supported within that sub-community plan and making sure that the increased residential in East Boulder is served by park services in some way or another.
Thanks, Regina and Ally, for speaking to that, and for that community member. I hope you're listening. Matt.
Thank you much. Let's see, I'll answer, I think I've kind of already touched on question 1 a bit already in some previous comments. And I do support, that more intense focus on taking care of what we have, given the sort of limited tax subsidies. I think where we're headed is what we've got to do. And so I appreciate the thoughtfulness to limit the negative impacts while trying to boost as much service. And certainly those alternatives are a good way to go. Since it was talking about sort of urban forestry, I do want to mention that OSMP also has a forestry plan. And so I think at some point it's helpful to maybe unify the Parks and Rec and open space plans for that more holistic view, which I think will then suss out some greater details about where there's either shared resources or opportunities with regards to a larger forestry conversation we talked about with Wildfire and other things. And so I think that's an opportunity that we have to go forward. And I'm also curious who won Council Bingo by a mention of the library district tonight. So that was unexpected. And, without vision, we wouldn't have landed on the moon. Without vision, we would not have open space. And without vision, we would be doing nothing more than walking the trail while staring at our feet. So I do think that vision is essential for us to have the aspirations to think big and to go places we may not otherwise go. So I think that's a real important thing to keep in there and not be too worried about what people are interpreting when maybe they're not reading the whole document.
Thank you. We're going to stay off the library district tonight. We're going to focus on Parks and Rec. So, Ally, you have more? It seems like we heard from everybody. Do you have more you want to say?
I think we heard answers from everything. And so I owe Aaron Brockett like some dessert or ice cream or something, because he asked us multiple times at CAC, you've requested 2 hours. Do you need 2 hours? And he gave it to us, but you all have been very effective and efficient in your conversation. I appreciate it. I want to just check with both our design workshop team and Regina and see if there was anything specifically we wanted to ask about. And I did just think of one, and I'll come back to it. But Regina, Becky, Eric.
There's nothing else from us.
I just wanted to double check with council that there wasn't any additional conversation around question 2 on the slide that I have shared on the screen about, and the more intense focus on taking care of what we have. I think we've covered a lot of that ground in all the conversation that we've had this evening. But if there was any other input that we hadn't gotten related to question number 2 on the slide here.
Okay, it seems like everybody says this means that new services will be very limited, is understood, and we support you in that.
Great.
Is that it, people? I'm looking. Oh, I see Aaron Brockett with a hand up.
Well, after Ally did that comment, I just have to say, Ally, this was a shorter discussion because you all laid out the material so extremely well. So you gave us a lot to talk about, but in a way that was easy to address on a relatively quick basis. And anyway, once again, you've done an extraordinary job. Thanks again.
Am I not getting any credit for pushing this meeting along? What is happening here?
And Tara, who has organized this very efficiently. Sorry, Tara.
Okay, well, with no more, look, we have Rachel.
Real quick, I did want to remind Ally that, Matt Benjamin and I are also on CAC. So if ice cream's going out, I don't know if it's all Mayor Brockett. But also, it was so nice to have Chuck from Prab here, and we didn't hear a lot from him. So I just wanted to invite, if there was anything he wanted to make sure we considered that he had the opportunity to share or chime in, and wanted to say thanks for taking the time to be here with us. It's generally very helpful. And I think that Ally and team and you all at Prab did tee it up so well, we didn't have a lot of questions, but.
Chuck, say something.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to make one comment. You've seen how great Ally's team is, and Ally is herself at presenting running the Parks Department and presenting these materials. She's really fantastic. One of the concerns I'd like to bring to council's attention is sort of a broader question of stovepiping of different departments. And for example, you're talking about urban tree canopies in the area of 30th Street where there's a lack. That largely involves transportation, where they need to rebuild the street and provide space for an urban tree canopy. And similarly, Boulder Housing Partners in that area is going to be developing a new low-income housing complex next to the mobile home park. But there's no multi-use path that would allow connection between the mobile home park through that facility to the adjacent park, which is very close. And as a result, it shows as a service desert in the Parks and Recreation picture. So I think that there needs to be more discussion about interdepartmental communication and co-aligning of master plans to sort of reach these broader community goals. And parking is another one, right? We a citywide parking strategy, not just one at Parks and Recreation facilities, but something that's comprehensive that drives our transportation goals and our climate goals. Thanks.
I'm so glad I asked you to chime in. Thank you for all that. It's really helpful perspective.
A really great comment about 30th Street. I agree. Let us know what we can do, Allie, to get that interdepartmental cooperation happening, especially along the Boulder Housing Partner area and 30th Street. I don't know what can be done, but we want to know. Anybody else? I don't see any hands. Anybody else? Going once, going twice, nobody. Okay, so with no more items on tonight's agenda, I'm going to close this meeting at 9:29 p.m. on Tuesday, April 26th.
Great job, Tara. Congrats. Wrapping up the first one.
Good job running the meeting, Tara. Thanks so much.
Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Allie, and all your team.
They're amazing.